Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. Welcome to today's hearing entitled The State of U.S. Science and Technology, Ensuring U.S. Global Leadership. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Welcome, everyone, to the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee first hearing of the 119th Congress. I want to thank our witnesses for being here and taking the time to come and share your expertise with us. Today's hearing presents an opportunity for this committee to assess the current condition of the United States' entire science and technology enterprise and discuss how we can continue to shape and enhance its future. America has positioned itself as the global leader in science and technology due to the rich ecosystem that we have created here. And while the federal government is the primary jurisdiction of this committee, we must recognize that it is only one aspect of our larger S&T enterprise. The federal government, academia, philanthropic, and private sectors each have a unique and equally important role to play. Over the past 20 years, we have seen a shift in how the U.S. research enterprise operates. The share of research funded by private and philanthropic entities is rising, playing a crucial role in funding exploratory work. According to the most recent National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics data, the United States spent nearly $800 billion on research and development in 2021. Of that, private sector businesses supported over $600 billion. Such investments drive advancements in critical technologies like AI, quantum, and semiconductors, ensuring that we are and remain at the leading edge. However, these investments by industry are not only in applied research and development. The business sector now funds 36% of America's basic research, which is very close to the 40% share that is funded by the federal government. These growing investments by industry suggest that U.S. firms see opportunities to capitalize on their research and development efforts, thanks to our free market economy. It is critical that we do not allow the government to hinder this progress. I believe that over the rest of this decade, we're going to see an incredible growth in our science and technology sectors. And the last thing that Congress should be doing is slowing this down. We should always be looking to protect, promote, and support such investments through tax reform, reducing bureaucratic red tape, and safeguarding patents and intellectual property rights. The growing role of industry and private philanthropy in R&D does not mean that the federal government does not have a role to play here. Federally funded research is the foundation on which major technological innovations are built, including smartphones, GPS, and the internet. It is critical for maintaining a healthy baseline over generations by supporting fundamental basic research, infrastructure, and facilities, creating new research disciplines, training generations of scientists and engineers. The government also has a critical role in supporting high-risk, high-reward initiatives with no obvious business cases. NASA and the eventual creation of the commercial space industry are very great examples. America's economic strength, national security, and quality of life all fundamentally depend on ongoing scientific progress and the strength of our S&T enterprise. While the United States continues to lead in the innovation race, we face fierce global competition. The Chinese Communist Party poses an especially formidable and growing strategic challenge. We know the CCP is aggressively pursuing plans to dominate the next generation of technology, including stealing our research and our innovations. Ceding leadership to the CCP will place our national security at grave risk, limit opportunities for U.S. industries to compete in the global economy, and pave the way for critical technologies like AI, quantum, and the advanced semiconductors to be tainted with CCP values. But let's be clear, we cannot beat China by becoming China. Today, the United States is at an inflection point, and it is critical for Congress to make strategic investments and reforms to bolster our S&T enterprise and enhance American competitiveness while leveraging the free market. We must build systems that promote coordination and cooperation across the entire U.S. S&T enterprise and put America first by unleashing our innovation and our ingenuity. America stands at a precipice, and this committee has the opportunity to make a once-in-a-lifetime impact on our nation's future. Thank you, and I yield back. And now I'd like to recognize the ranking member, the gentlewoman from California, for her opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Babin, and I want to welcome all our new members on both sides of the aisle to this, our first hearing, and welcome a very distinguished panel of witnesses. It's my hope and intent that this committee continue to be a place for constructive debate and collaboration that represents the best of what this institution can achieve. While the Science Committee didn't enact enough legislation last Congress, this committee did pass many good bipartisan bills, and we worked hard to get them over the finish line, and I stand ready to work with my new chairman to continue in that effort and that work. Having said that, I can't ignore the reality outside these four walls in our committee room. We're holding a hearing about U.S. leadership in science and technology with a widely respected panel of witnesses, while the new administration is actively and with unprecedented speed and ferocity apparently seeking to tear down and undermine some of the very scientific foundations upon which our leadership has been so painstakingly built. I have ultimate and total respect for Chairman Babin, who sat on this committee for many years, and who I am certain appreciates the importance of the work I do and we do, but I am concerned about reporting that science programs may be targeted as part of reconciliation plans being put together. I just don't know how anyone reconciles the rhetoric about competing with China with pulling the rug out from under our own research enterprise. For many decades, there has been bipartisan consensus that the federal role in basic research is essential. We cannot pull back, and that basic research funding needs to continue if we are to take the lead in science in the world. But in the past 2 weeks, there's been chaos in the science and technology community. Research across the United States was paused because the administration supposedly wanted to weed out unidentified DEI, literally until a court stopped it. Researchers across America wondered if they could pay their graduate students and postdocs. Now, while Communist China is making unprecedented investments in science research and talent, our government is not supporting our scientists in the way we should. We're going to have to, as a united Congress, we're going to have to decide whether it's worth standing with Elon Musk if it means surrendering to China. Soon enough, the American people are going to expect actual results from this Congress and this administration, results that would make their lives better, give them hope that their children's lives will be better. But our children's lives will be drastically worse if we lose the AI race with China. Our future economy will be much worse if we lose the clean energy race with China, and our national security will be decidedly worse if we lose the space race with China. My fear is that the chaos the new administration is sowing will be enough to leave our science and technology enterprise in ruins, with Chinese communist leaders in Beijing popping champagne corks. To the accomplished, serious panel of witnesses sitting before us, you have dedicated your careers in service to the U.S. science and technology enterprise, and I want to thank you for that. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for your testimony and your willingness to come before us and answer our questions. I do not blame you if it all feels a little bit surreal. We have serious policy questions for you, and I know you will give thoughtful answers. There are many new members of our committee on both sides of the aisle who may not yet, but will, come to understand the critical importance of federal investments in science and technology because of hearings like this one and experts like yourself. If they don't yet, they will come to understand that we need to tap into scientific talents from all walks of life across our great nation and from all across the world if we are to remain global leaders in science and innovation. If they don't yet, they will come to understand that our premier federal laboratories at NIST, DOE, and NASA are decades old and crumbling, and we can't possibly expect to lead by cutting these agencies further. For decades, we have proudly called this committee the Committee of the Future, and I hope we continue to live up to that moniker. I stand to be ready as a partner in that endeavor with you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. And now let me introduce our distinguished witnesses. Our first witness today is the Honorable Heather Wilson. Dr. Wilson became the president of the University of Texas at El Paso in my state of Texas in 2019 after serving as the Secretary of the United States Air Force. She previously served as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from New Mexico from 1998 to 2009. She is also currently a member of the National Science Board and the newly formed Texas Space Commission. Our next witness is the Honorable Walter Copan. Dr. Copan is the Vice President for Research and Technology Transfer at the Colorado School of Mines. He previously served as the Undersecretary of Commerce for Standards and Technology and the 16th Director of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And next we have Dr. Sudip Parikh. Dr. Parikh is the 19th Chief Executive Officer of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the Executive Publisher of the Science family of journals. Immediately prior to joining AAAS, Parikh was Senior Vice President and Managing Director at DIA Global, and prior to DIA, Parikh was a Vice President at Battelle. And our final witness is Mr. Sam Hammond. Mr. Hammond is the Chief Economist at the Foundation for American Innovation. He previously served as the Director of Social Policy for the Niskanen Center and an economist for the Government of Canada. With that, I now recognize Dr. Wilson for 5 minutes to present her testimony. Dr. Wilson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With your permission, I'd like to submit my full statement for the record and just summarize some key points.
So ordered.
First, since the end of World War II, America has dominated in science and engineering, and we no longer are. We no longer are. Western democracies are losing the technology competition. China now leads in 37 of 44 critical technologies. They have surpassed us in talent production, research publications, patents, and technology-intensive manufacturing. We need to meet this challenge. Second, the pace of technological change will continue to accelerate. It's kind of hard to believe that it'll continue to accelerate beyond what it already is, but it will. Artificial intelligence is going to accelerate hypothesis formulation, experimental design, and data analysis. It's hard to believe that it was only 2 years ago that we started playing with ChatGPT. And at first, it was just a game for all of us. But my guess is that everyone in this room has probably used some form of AI tool today and certainly this week, some of us multiple times. So what's to be done in the face of this? Well, developing a national strategy is important, but here's some key elements I think that this committee and this Congress needs to think about. None of our 18 intelligence entities monitor for scientific or technical surprise. We haven't had to. We have been so dominant since the end of the Second World War that we didn't have to worry about surprise and scanning the horizon. That is a critical gap. And every leader in the military and the intelligence community acknowledges it, but none of them have it as their job. That's something that the Congress has to initiate a solution for. Second, basic research is still the pacemaker of technological progress. That's what drives our security, our health, our economy, and federal support for basic and early stage applied research is absolutely vital. Third, one of the things I think federal agencies and the government needs to do is to figure out how to collaborate more closely with the states. The top funder of research in cancer in America is the National Institutes of Health. Number 2 is the state of Texas. that's put $6 billion into cancer research since 2007. And Mr. Chairman, as you mentioned, 2 years ago, they created the Texas Space Commission and funded it, supporting research and infrastructure to keep America dominant in space in partnership with federal entities. We're going back to the moon and then to Mars, but it doesn't just have to be the federal government that does it. And fourth, we need to inspire the next generation. We need to plant seeds broadly and reach the missing millions who don't know yet that science and engineering is a heck of a lot of fun. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very, very much. And now I'd like to recognize Dr. Copan for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you so much, Chairman Babin, Ranking Member Lofgren, members of the committee, and distinguished participants. It's a privilege to testify on the state of U.S. science and technology, critically important to our nation's global economic competitiveness and our national security. It's my honor to lead research and technology transfer at Colorado School of Mines, a top-tier U.S. research university rated in the top 3 engineering programs in America. I recently served our nation as director of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and prior with 2 of the U.S. Department of Energy national labs. My leadership experience spans public and private sectors as executive, entrepreneur, and investor. 2 decades ago, the United States was the undisputed global leader in science and technology and in driving innovation for economic value. Today, however, by many internationally recognized measures, U.S. global leadership position in the majority of critical technology areas has been overtaken by China. The U.S. still holds a clear lead in 7 of 64 top technology categories, whereas China is currently leading in all the rest. China now leads in the numbers of patents, highly cited research publications, and respected journals, while also seeking to dominate global technology standards. At the same time, the U.S. has allowed strength of our intellectual property protections to decline. We are in a period where crisis presents America with great opportunity. The U.S. must take a new strategic approach to the future of research and S&T advancement that coordinates across government agencies. We must leverage collaboration and investments with the private sector, states, bolster education at all levels, and engage with our national R&D, intellectual property, standards, and innovation enterprise. We have the chance to drive great synergies in federal R&D investment through a national S&T and innovation strategy. Investment in public sector R&D is an essential part of our global competitiveness, but its value and high rates of investment return are not always fully appreciated. Substantial industrial productivity gains and the majority of our tech startups originate from public R&D funding. Preserving the integrity of the Bayh-Dole Act for U.S. innovation is essential, and we must now implement much-needed modernization of the Stevenson-Weidler Act to deliver increased innovation outcomes from federal research. Flexible and efficient collaborations between universities, government, industry, and science philanthropy are key to America's success in S&T. The future U.S. workforce must have the skills necessary for the STEM-related careers that drive the innovation economy. A prepared workforce is essential for rebuilding and reshoring our advanced manufacturing base for all industries in the future economy and to produce and utilize necessary critical materials. We have work to do. America's K-12 educational outcomes have fallen behind other nations. Attracting and retaining talented people from other nations are also essential to our innovation economy. Further, international scientific collaboration with like-minded nations enable the acceleration of discoveries and build diplomacy supporting America's position abroad. Over the past 2 decades, the bureaucracy and administrative burdens associated with America's publicly funded R&D have also skyrocketed. This bureaucracy has increased costs and reduced the productivity of U.S. research. We must continually increase efficiencies in R&D, build interagency coordination, and strengthen our intellectual property system, our technology standards leadership, and our global partnerships. We must further modernize legislation and policies to remove barriers and incentivize innovation for America to continue to lead the world. Thanks to this committee for your important work towards securing the science, technology, and innovation leadership for U.S. economic and national security. I look forward to answering questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Copan. And now I'd like to recognize Dr. Parikh for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to you and to Representative Lofgren and to the members of the committee for the invitation today. I also have a written testimony I'd like to include in the record and summarize now.
So ordered.
Thank you. In thinking about the invitation today, I thought about the fact that we are living just in extraordinary times, and I hope that we all recognize that. When we look around us, the pace of innovation has been spoken about already is extraordinary. Just in this last week, we heard about the fact there are building blocks for life in material from an asteroid. We learned about the idea that a new pain medication has been approved that is in a whole different biological pathway than the ones before it. These are extraordinary times. We also see that engineering is taking place. 50 people coming together in a private company building a plane that can go faster than the speed of sound. Chuck Yeager is celebrating today, and that is amazing, and that happens in a place like this country, in a place where we bring together our federal investments, our academic researchers, our engineers, and those who are willing to take risks in a way that really doesn't happen anywhere else. And we know that that opportunity is still before us. Sometimes people say to me, gosh, it's all slowing down. Are you out of your minds? It's increasing. It's faster, and the opportunity is huge. There was a time when Michael Faraday came before a similar group of people 150 years ago, and he's the guy who really helped us understand electrons and electronics. And he was asked, "This is all great, these electrons y'all are working with, but what good is it?" And his answer is this apocryphal answer, which I love, which is he said, "I don't know, but someday you're going to tax it. Someday you're going to tax it." And I think that we have entire fields of endeavor out there that we know. We don't know exactly what they're going to lead to, but we know someday we're going to tax it. And the thing that's changed over time is that other countries have figured this out too. And so 3 things are happening at the same time. The first is this pace of change is accelerating so rapidly, and the tools and strategies that got us here are insufficient to get us to the next level. Transformational technologies are reshaping our way of life, and you've heard about that. Second, we face a bunch of threats that are really important. Health, food and water security, environmental resilience, energy production, utilization, storage. These are huge, big societal challenges that we've got to work together on as an enterprise. And you described it so well, Dr. Babin, as the ecosystem that is here in America. And then third, more than ever, we are competing with other nations, and particularly China. And you heard those statistics. It's worth me saying it again. I'll repeat it. They rival us in talent, infrastructure, and capital investment, can put our economic and national security at risk. They train more scientists and engineers than we do. They file for more international patents than we do. They publish just as many highly cited scientific papers as we do, and are leading in many critical areas of research and development. I say that again for repetition's sake because it is worth knowing in these rooms, in this building, because this is the place where we can make a difference in that. And so, frustratingly, we are not at our full potential right now as a scientific enterprise. And there are recommendations that you heard from Dr. Wilson or Dr. Copan that I am fully behind and I agree with completely. And so I will move to saying that there are also things that we shouldn't do. We shouldn't shoot ourselves in the foot. We shouldn't do things that slow us down. And so we've got to recognize that this enterprise as a whole, from the federal investment to the workforce to the industry investment to tax and regulatory policy, it's all part of it. It's what differentiates us from other nations. But when I look at what are the things that slow us down, one thing that slows us down is when we are hurting our own enterprise with self-inflicted wounds. And so I want to recognize the fact that global competition, and we're taking it seriously, we can do that without demonizing people or international collaboration in the process. Our colleagues of Chinese, Indian, and other immigrant backgrounds make up a substantial percentage of the American science and technology workforce, and they are colleagues and friends and deserving of respect. And we've got to ensure that our drive to compete doesn't alter our humanity. It doesn't mean we have to be stupid or irresponsible, but it means we have to preserve our humanity. Now, when we make America less welcoming to scientists who are immigrants or those who've been here for generations, we only hurt our own competitiveness. And so when we close ourselves off to international collaboration, we lose the visibility to advances made around the world, and we slow progress for everybody else, and we also have the danger of being leapfrogged. And then lastly, the announcement of an abrupt spending freeze on science and technology that happened last week, it really broke trust. It broke trust and it hurt the S&T enterprise. It's the kind of action that, even if it's brief, can have a lasting negative impact. Many of the scientists that I talk to, particularly those early in their careers, they live paycheck to paycheck. And I was most saddened to hear that some of those young scientists are the ones that are thinking, should I be doing this? Now, I think that, that transitions can be challenging, but let's just make sure that we're communicating throughout it, we're saying what the priorities of the country are, and that we're going to continue to invest in the way that I've heard today. So I'll end there, but thank you so much for the support of this committee. Your work on this committee actually is more important now than it's ever been. Thank you.
Amen to that. Thank you. We've had some excellent opening statements from our witnesses so far. And then your testimony reminds me of another story I heard when Benjamin Franklin was shown the flight of a hot air balloon. And an accompanying person sitting next to Benjamin Franklin said, "What on earth good could a hot air balloon do for humanity?" And he turned to him in return, and Dr. Franklin said, "What good is a baby?" And little knowing that just about 125 years later we'd be heading to the moon. So anyway, great testimony. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Hammond for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Babin, Ranking Member Lofgren, members of the committee, and for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Samuel Hammond. I am the Chief Economist from the Foundation for American Innovation. We're a group of technologists that focus on promoting technology, talent, and ideas that benefit America and promote a more abundant future. I'm here to emphasize remarks I've already made about the importance of American science and federal science funding to U.S. national security and competitiveness, especially vis-a-vis China. But it's actually for that reason that it should be disturbing to see evidence that science funding and the productivity of our science funding has lost the bang for its buck. Some dismiss this as a natural decline, that prior generations picked all the low-hanging fruit. Others, myself included, suspect this simply excuses systemic failures on the part of our premier research institutions. While federal spending on science and R&D is a smaller share of GDP than in the past, in absolute and inflation-adjusted terms, it's never been higher. Yet the last 40 years have seen relative stagnation in both scientific productivity and the broader economy. A 2023 article in Nature concluded that the number of disruptive breakthroughs has plummeted across every major scientific field. It's hard to isolate a single cause for the slowdown, but we have some hints. In 1980, the National Institutes for Health funded twice as many researchers under the age of 40 as those over 50, whereas today it funds 5 times as many over the age of 50. Principal investigators now spend over 40% of their time on administrative compliance, and a risk-averse peer review culture punishes heterodoxy, often rewarding institutions with the best grant offices rather than the best ideas. Meanwhile, in recent years, the influx of diversity, equity, and inclusion mandates into the NSF and NIH has politicized research, demoralized faculty, and wasted billions of taxpayer dollars. It is no wonder that many of today's most transformative breakthroughs now come from privately funded nonprofits and research organizations. These are organizations that give scientists multi-year support without constant grant writing and bureaucracy. In 2024, for example, the Arc Institute in Palo Alto, just 3 years after its founding, pioneered a revolutionary new technique for programmable RNA and precision gene editing, thanks in part to a model of no strings attached research funding. That experience suggests the federal government could reap large returns by allocating resources away from cumbersome academic bureaucracies and towards similar organizations, who are sometimes known as focused research organizations. Zooming out, the broader factor behind our scientific slowdown in progress is that we just overregulate the real economy. Most practical innovation emerges from a learning by doing process, yet entire branches of technology, from nuclear energy to civil supersonic aviation, have been prematurely cut off by de facto regulatory prohibitions. China, meanwhile, achieves scale rapidly, generating feedback loops that accelerate technological improvement, as we've seen in batteries and solar panels and other areas. So dismantling such barriers at home is paramount if we want to revitalize our industrial base and our scientific might. Meanwhile, AI is already revolutionizing the scientific enterprise with the potential for self-driving labs where AI agents control and run experiments in parallel, could speed up scientific discovery at an unprecedented rate. The federal government can support this transition at minimal cost by unlocking large public data sets. For instance, the Department of Energy's trove of material science data to produce large foundation models to train such AIs. But still, life-saving breakthroughs will stall if they hit regulatory roadblocks, such as the FDA's cumbersome clinical trial process. So across the board, I believe that maximizing the full upside from AI and science in general will likely require Congress to radically rethink and reconfigure many of our legacy institutions, not just reform them on the margin. In AI more broadly, America's advantage is in our hardware and what I sometimes call open source diplomacy. The rise of DeepSeek in China shows that there is less of a technical barrier separating us and China than we might have hoped. Our edge instead lies at the ecosystem level, with access to the most advanced chips, secure supply chains, and heavy investment in power infrastructure. Large AI data centers will soon need on-site energy generation on the order of gigawatts, a requirement that will collide with permitting, utility rules, and environmental laws, if left unaddressed. Meanwhile, open source AI models are becoming the default for critical infrastructure and global researchers, but have the potential to contain undetectable backdoors. The only surefire way to certify that a model's integrity is to audit its code and training data. That's why we have the U.S. AI Safety Institute. And with the rise of DeepSeek and this new competition from China, I believe it should be retooled to do precisely that, to provide a voluntary seal of approval for developers to know that America's open source models are not just the best, but also secure. In closing, a forward-thinking, less bureaucratic, and rigorously merit-based approach to federal science policy is essential if we want to preserve our technological leadership. By deregulating the real economy and safeguarding our AI hardware, we can build on America's tradition of pushing the scientific frontier and lead the world into a new golden age of growth and discovery. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Now, as we move on to questions, the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. I was very pleased about President Trump's recent announcement of Stargate, which promises up to $500 billion in private sector investments for artificial intelligence infrastructure. This announcement represents a significant step in the right direction, unleashing the talent and resources of our private industry right here at home. And so my question would be, and I would really emphasize very briefly, each one of you, your answer. What should the federal government be doing to encourage further investments like these? How can Congress or the administration reduce red tape, strategically prioritizing engagements, and prevent federal funding from crowding out private sector investments? Very briefly, because I have several other questions. Thank you. Dr. Wilson.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think that there's any chance that the federal funding will crowd out the level of multi-billion dollars of investment in AI. I do think that there may be, the biggest challenge will be energy. And from a regulatory point of view, there may be some interstate energy grid issues that the Congress may be able to help with. But the most important thing you'll do is drive discovery and develop the talent to be able to use the AI that's coming.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Dr. Copan.
The opportunity before us is to leverage all the resources that we have available as a nation, utilizing private sector, public sector, philanthropic availability of resources, driving the future of our workforce, and being goal-oriented to really accomplish what the nation needs with respect to advancing the frontiers and utilizing the tools that we have available to us while preparing the next generation.
Thank you. Dr. Parikh.
In addition to the things we just heard, I'd say that it's often hard to create these things separately every time, independently every time. A template for how you do governance when you're going to have federal dollars and state dollars and private dollars and philanthropic dollars is really important, because otherwise we're reinventing it every time in every state. And by the way, every state in the union is trying to think of ways to pull together the industry and the philanthropy.
Thank you. Mr. Hammond.
So as Stargate illustrates, the private sector is stepping up to the challenge, but if we want to encourage more of this investment, we can use things like our federal lands. The Biden administration in the final months of its administration issued an executive order to that effect, but one of the things that needs to change is to remove the clean energy requirements of that act, of that executive order, and I believe that the Trump administration will do that. More aggressively, the Defense Production Act should be considered as a tool to expedite and compress timelines for critical components like high voltage transformers.
Thank you. Okay, next question for Dr. Wilson. As you know, there have been discussions about moving the NASA headquarters out of the Washington, D.C. metro area. I'd like to get your perspective, given your experience with making facility and infrastructure decisions for the U.S. Air Force. Can you discuss what criteria should be taken into consideration when selecting a new site for NASA headquarters, and if there are any specific locations you think would be a prime candidate?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're right. We did, the Air Force used to set criteria for selection for basing. In thinking about NASA, you know, it's hard not to go back to some of the after actions on Columbia and Challenger about strengthening the mission focus and accountability and tying closely research and operations to higher level decisions. I don't think it all has to be in one place, but I do think there's absolutely a strong argument that says it doesn't all have to be in Washington. What other criteria? Cost of living should be a big one, and that always is in Defense Department basing decisions for your people. Availability of talent, absolutely vital. If you look at those kinds of criteria, it seems to me that there are two locations in America that stand out very clearly. One, obviously, is the Cape and the Florida Space Coast. The other, very clearly, is Houston, Texas, that has the people, the talent, the cost of living. Artemis is heavily supported in Houston to strengthen the mission focus and the accountability to then go back to the moon and beyond to Mars. So I think the final thing that might be a criteria now going forward is state support. And that's something that's very, very clear from the state of Texas as well.
Great, good to hear. Okay, well, real quickly, Dr. Wilson, again, in an interview with the El Paso Times in August of last year, you stated that UTEP had never had an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. However, your university produces an overwhelming number of STEM graduates compared with other R1 Hispanic serving institutions with DEI offices. Could you explain how UTEP's approach differs from other institutions and why your policy has been so effective?
Yes, sir. UTEP never created a DEI office, but we have the results people who advocate for DEI say they want. There's a better way, and the University of Texas at El Paso has been doing it for over 30 years. We started out with recognizing that talent is widely distributed, but opportunity is not. And using the support of the University of Texas Regents as well as Title V and the Higher Education Act, systematically studying ourselves and our students to identify those things that will help individual students to succeed, and then doing those things. We meet each student where they are, and we help them to become a better version of themselves. And that means looking not just at academic, but also social, financial, cultural matters. Our university is 96% Hispanic. We are 66% Pell Grant eligible, 96% minority, 84% Hispanic. We have one of the lowest debt loads of any university in America, even though 29% of my students come from families making less than $20,000 a year. If you give students access to an excellent higher education and show them where the doors are, you can inspire them to achieve at very, very high levels. And that's why UTEP is something of a unicorn. But I have to say, I think if more universities were like UTEP, higher education would have a better reputation in America.
Thank you so very much for that. And I'm out of time, so I apologize. And I now recognize Ranking Member Lofgren.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to each of the witnesses for your thoughtful statements and sharing your perspective. You know, I think you're right, Mr. Chairman, that it's an ecosystem here that we need to recognize and support all elements of. You know, for myself, I think about the three of the main science enterprises that I think work together is quantum fusion and AI. If we succeed on fusion, it'll deal with the energy issues posed by AI. But the last grant out of the Department of Energy on fusion was using AI, and obviously quantum, if we make great strides there, will have a huge impact. So the three are important, and they're interrelated, and they are key to our future. One of the things that, as we sit here, and we're getting reports, we don't know all of whether they're accurate, but we're not only getting news reports, but reports from individuals in agencies, that there is apparently a plan in the National Science Foundation to lay off between 1/4 or half of its staff in the next 2 months. We also know that Mr. Musk and his team is in the NOAA offices today and reporting, and we don't know if it's accurate or not, that there may be an action similar to what occurred with USAID, and that eliminating the Weather Service. I'm wondering from each of you whether, if these reports prove to be accurate, what impact would that have on our success as a science leading country? What impact would that have for our competitors in China?
Let me begin. Thank you so much. The delays and the uncertainty created for the scientific enterprise in the United States will certainly cause harm. And we've seen evidence of that already, as colleagues on this stand have shared. The rest of the world is not standing still while the United States has such delays. And so maintaining momentum in the United States, maintaining confidence and progress toward the future technologies that matter is absolutely essential.
Doctor?
You know, I agree with Dr. Copan. We're in a global race. We're in a race for science and technology leadership, and it has profound implications. Those things you mentioned, quantum, AI, there's a race every day. People are spending their nights in their offices, in their laboratories, working in those spaces. And anytime you think in terms of huge reductions in force at the NSF or NIST or NOAA or elsewhere, especially if they turn out to be random in nature without prioritizing which skills and expertise are needed, you end up if you take that metaphor, you're breaking your own legs in the middle of the race. Now, I hope that those stories aren't true, and I don't know how to judge it. But what we do need is communication from the top of those agencies and from the top of the administration to say, these are the things we prioritize, and we need you to do the stuff in the lab, do the work, because we need to stay in that race.
Let me just, Mr. Hammond, do you have a disagreement with that?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So as I talked about in my opening statement, scientific productivity has declined quite dramatically, and I think our scientific institutions are in need of a deeper disruption. On the DEI case specifically, President Trump has issued an executive order repealing and making illegal those DEI grants. And between 2020 and 2024, NSF and NIH funding going to DEI initiatives increased from less than 1% to over 27%. This is not science.
If I may, I was just thinking about, we really don't have the kind of arguments, Mr. Hammond, that I think in this committee that you addressed. Because I think about, and it was our committee's lead, the very light touch of regulations on fusion that we are very important, that we don't have a fission regime for fusion development, and it was our committee that led on that. We had a unanimous vote on next generation nuclear. It was the AI task force staffed really by the science committee staff that approached a light touch to AI, not a prescriptive effort. And Mr. Obernolte was the chair of that committee, and we had, I think, unanimous recommendations. So it's not as if we're embracing bureaucracy or regulation that is prescriptive and brain dead. On the other hand, doing that is not, it's not going to replace funding for basic research. And that's one of the concerns that I think we have, that if we have, I talked to a neuroscientist just Monday who is doing research on Alzheimer's. And she is top tier in the United States. All of the panels have been yanked back, and there's no opportunity to discuss. Hopefully that will stop soon, but it's already had an impact on basic research. And I think certainly when the scientists weren't paid last week, that had a huge impact on young scientists who are already working at elementary school teachers are earning more than the postdocs in some cases, so causing them to question their career choices. I see that my time has expired, Mr. Chair. You've been very generous, and I will therefore yield back.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Baird.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member and I appreciate all the witnesses being here. You know, your testimony and your expertise is really beneficial for helping us make decisions that are wise decisions as we use taxpayer dollars. But my first question deals for Dr. Wilson and Dr. Copan and Dr. Parikh. This committee is very familiar with CCP's efforts to steal our research and development. And so does the academic community fully appreciate this risk? And what are universities doing to protect our nation's R&D? So, Dr.
Mr. Chairman, there's probably no president of a university in the country who's more sensitive to this issue than me, having been the Secretary of the Air Force before I returned to higher education. We comply with federal laws, of course, and there are substantial regulations there, but also with Texas law with respect to research integrity and protection. But I would also say this, that domestically, counterintelligence with respect to universities is largely a responsibility in the federal government of the local FBI office. And there are only probably 1 or 2 offices in the FBI in very large cities that really have competence and expertise in this area. Law enforcement is not the same as intelligence analysis. And I think the Congress, and I was here at the time, made some major reorganizations post 9/11 and gave a new mission to the FBI with respect to counterintelligence. And I don't think it's worked. And I think it's time to relook at that.
I believe that having systems as well as culture, the partnerships that are necessary to assure the interests of the United States are secured is absolutely essential in the academic enterprise as it is across federal science and technology. Having leadership that focuses on these matters, that looks at aspects also of cybersecurity and cybercrime, together with ensuring that intellectual properties are appropriately secured and that information that can be seen as sensitive and misused by other powers are kept under appropriate control. It's about helping people to do the right thing. And in many cases across the enterprise, education together with systems and ensuring that we avoid undue foreign influence of any kind is an essential set of processes.
I think we've got to be as open as possible and as closed as is absolutely necessary. It is important, and you've brought up a really important point that I think many in the university community have started to realize. It hasn't gotten everywhere, and so we have to make sure that that message is out in the scientific workforce. That said, we also got to keep our humanity and recognize that we have many, many scientists in the S&T community, in industry and in academia that are either foreign-born or are of ancestry from nations that we know can be a challenge for us. And we got to be able to do both things at the same time. And I think we're capable of it.
Thank you. I know that that is a concern when you have foreign students. I would say, don't get me wrong, we need those and we want those, but the exchange of information has to be monitored. And so I appreciate your answers on that regard. So, Mr. Hammond, I'm going to go to you next, if you will. Given the increased investments in R&D by the industry, by our U.S. industry, they're also a target for the CCP. So how is the private industry addressing the threat, and how can the federal government be helpful in that regard?
Perhaps the area where this is most important is in the area of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is the Manhattan Project of our era, but it's being produced not in Los Alamos, but at startup companies based in Silicon Valley with very different cultures and particularly very different security cultures. Today, lab security at one of these AI companies may be closing the blinds. And we also, we don't benefit from the fact that given that we have such an open society in the United States, it's very possible for people to cozy up, to go to the cafeteria, to eavesdrop. And so we need to take lab security, especially in AI, much more seriously. At the same time, going to the academic question, we have tools in our toolkit for screening technology partnerships with China. When I looked at the authors on the recent DeepSeek paper, I was surprised with the number that had interned or worked at Microsoft Research, at NVIDIA, other U.S. companies, and so we need to take that much more seriously and not be naive.
Thank you, and my time's run out, so I yield back.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Dr. Baird. Next, I'd like to recognize the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you, Chairman Baird and Ranking Member Lofgren, and thank you to the witnesses. I cannot sit in this hearing this morning and pretend that everything is normal, because it's not. This hearing should provide an opportunity for us to applaud U.S. innovation, identify opportunities for future investments to lower consumer energy costs, improve community resilience against extreme weather events, and support an AI-ready workforce. But instead, we need to talk about how the first weeks of the Trump administration have severely disrupted federal research and what the consequences of that disruption are. The Trump administration's reckless executive orders, OMB's unlawful memo, and Elon Musk have thrown our federal research enterprise into chaos. They've threatened America's scientific leadership, especially threatened federal employees, but also researchers across the country who benefit from federal grants. They disrupted critical research in my home state of Oregon and across the country, and by freezing federal grants and dismantling scientific integrity protections, gutting climate initiatives, this administration has jeopardized some groundbreaking research. In my home state, for example, on oceanic climate change, on advanced semiconductor design, on the next generation of clean energy technologies, and more. And I want to emphasize that the administration's actions have had a chilling effect through the research community, threatening decades of work and billions of dollars in federal scientific investments. At a time when countries like China are surging ahead in AI, in semiconductors and climate science, why is this administration sabotaging our own scientists? I note that the president has rescinded the order creating the AI Safety Institute, and now the head of that institute is leaving. And you know where you can read those headlines? In the Asian press. What message does that send? In 1988, that was the year my now 36-year-old son was born, a NASA scientist testified in Congress about the importance of addressing climate change. It's pathetic and it's dangerous that this administration has its head in the sand, or maybe more accurately, its fingers in the oil wells. It's a great disservice to our country and to the planet. And I want to ask each of the witnesses, does freezing NSF research funds strengthen global leadership in science? Dr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just say a couple of things. First,
This is just a yes or no question. Does freezing NSF research funds strengthen U.S. global leadership in science?
I'm not sure I can answer that with it. The NSF lifted that freeze for us at least a couple of days ago, so they're reviewing their
I understand.
portfolio.
I just have to reclaim
But
my
if-
time because I have some more
sure,
questions.
okay.
Dr. Copan, does freezing NSF research funds strengthen U.S. global leadership in science?
No, it does not. Having a delay in our scientific progress certainly enables others to take advantage.
Absolutely. Dr. Parikh, yes or no question. Does freezing NSF research funds strengthen U.S. global leadership in science?
No, it does not. And uncertainty in any form is a challenge.
Correct. Mr. Hammond, does freezing NSF research funds strengthen U.S. global leadership in science?
I think that's a leading question. Someone earlier said,
Just a yes or no answer, please.
it was earlier said that freezing this reduced trust in science, but I think the lack of trust goes both ways, and a temporary freeze
I'm going to
is fully
reclaim my
appropriate.
time. Dr. Parikh, will eliminating diversity initiatives that expand the scientific workforce help our ability to compete globally?
We've got to pull talent from all over this country in the way that Dr. Wilson described.
And I appreciated that description.
And I think that makes so much sense. The opportunity, we have to make sure we have the opportunity to go as far as people's God-given talent and drive can take them, and that means finding them where they are. And we need programs that do that.
I appreciate that. And also, Dr. Parikh, will rescinding executive orders on climate research bolster America's role in combating climate change?
I don't know the details of those executive orders, but what I can say is that climate change research and research into environmental resilience are critically important for obvious reasons, because we see the implications of changes in weather.
And I prefer that the U.S. have leadership in that area. Dr. Wilson, I know you're a member of the National Science Board. So how much congressionally authorized and appropriated research funding has been affected by the administration's efforts? And if not resolved soon, how much federal research funding could be lost by this pause?
Well, none has been affected so far. There's a National Science Board meeting next week, and I expect that we will get an update at that time.
Thank you. And I do hope, Dr. Wilson, that if researchers have to resubmit applications for some reason, that they get the technical assistance that they need. And I'm almost out of time, but as I yield back, I'd like to remind my colleagues that researchers in Oregon and across the country, they're making life-saving discoveries. There's nothing woke or DEI about predicting the next devastating earthquake or tsunami, about detecting a wildfire before it spreads, or about protecting ocean health to support coastal and fishing economies. And I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to recognize gentleman from California, Mr. Obernolte.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses. It's been another great hearing here in SST. Dr. Copan, I'd like to start with you. I think you've got a fascinating background as the former director of NIST. We heard Mr. Hammond in his testimony talk about the need for the AI Safety Institute in protecting this proliferation of potentially dangerous open source models and the introduction of intentional flaws into those models. Can you talk about this body made an effort last year to codify the Safety Institute. That was a bill that I sponsored, the House companion. We're going to try again this year. Can you talk about why that's so important?
Thank you so much, Congressman. It's an important tool for America to be able to validate the performance of technologies, and having an AI Safety Institute, having the ability to have independent verification of product performance is part of creating a foundation of trust and the broader utilization of the tools that are so important to the nation. And I think that's one of the important resources that an institute like NIST provides to America, is to provide scientifically sound, measurement science validated approaches that enable industry, that support intelligent creation of consensus standards for the industry.
Right. I couldn't agree more. And I mean, as you know, I was proud to lead the AI task force in the last Congress. And one of the things that we one of the key findings that we identified in our report is the benefits of embracing a sectoral model of regulation in the United States, which is very different than what's being done in other parts of the world. But part of sectoral regulation is giving each sectoral regulator a toolbox of tools that they can use in their efforts. And what I think we need to do a better job of educating people in Congress is that empowering agencies like the Safety Institute to come out with these testing and evaluation methodologies, those are non-compulsory. They're voluntary standards, and our regulators can use them or not use them as appropriate. So it's not expanding the bureaucracy, it's not expanding the regulatory state to do that, and that's why I think it's so important to follow through on that. And I'll be reintroducing legislation to do that this year. But thank you for the testimony.
No, thank you so much, and the understanding of the role that voluntary consensus technology standards play for global commerce and also for the acceptance and broad utilization of technologies is absolutely central.
Dr. Wilson, enjoyed our conversation here. I hadn't met you before. You talked in your testimony about the need to keep AI, American innovation AI, and in a globally competitive landscape. And I'm interested in your perspective as the head of an academic institution about how we enable institutions like yours to continue to do cutting-edge, frontier-level research in AI. Because I have a fear that we are moving more towards a model where cutting-edge AI innovation is done in private companies and not in academic settings. And when you do that, you lose all of the advantages of doing research in academia. You lose transparency and publication and peer review, and the ability to leverage research that's done other places and literally stand on the shoulders of giants, as so many innovations have done here in the United States. So, Dr. Wilson, how can we enable that research to continue to be done in academic settings as well as in corporate settings?
Sir, very good question, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things. Access to data and compute. at UTEP as one example, we have 1,400 computer science majors. We now offer a bachelor's and a master's in AI, and we are creating an AI institute. Funding universities to have AI institutes, both funded by the federal government, but also in partnership with industry, can allow both the development of talent and success long-term in the ways that you described.
Right, I very much agree. As you know, the National AI Research Resource, NARE we call it, is something that has been a pilot program to try and address the exact problems that you've raised. I was very disappointed that we were unable to get the formal authorization for that across the finish line last year. That would have been a really great testimony to our colleague, Congresswoman Eshoo, as she retired from Congress. We're going to try that again this year, and I'm hopeful that that we can do that. And just to we have some responsibilities as member of Congress to enable the people at this table to take those steps, and we need to follow through on those. I see I'm out of time. Mr. Hammond, I was going to ask you about export controls on AI chips, but I'll submit that for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. And now, let's see, I need to call on the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Ross.
Well, thank you very much for holding this hearing, Chairman Babin. I think it's an important time to be holding it, and thank you to Ranking Member Lofgren for highlighting the events of the last 2 weeks that really do, I believe, put our scientific enterprise at risk. And of course, thank you to all the panelists for joining us today. Dr. Parikh, it is a pleasure to see you again, and it was an honor to host you in my district last summer for a STEM workforce development roundtable and a tour of NC State's College of Textiles and barbecue. Yes. Which, of course, North Carolina has excellent barbecue. We won't fight Texas over that. I represent part of the research triangle, along with Congresswoman Foushee, who represents the rest of it. And it's a major center for science and technology and home to some of the world's top research universities and institutions. And as I said, today's hearing comes at a critical moment. The actions of the Trump administration over the last 2 weeks have greatly disrupted our science and technology enterprise, to the point where I've had professors and researchers stop me on the street in my district. We were home all last week. We heard panic from the universities when we went to an event that was about a new children's hospital, and all the university folks were there, worried about grants, worried about their research. Any freezing of federal funding for research grants, freezing of federal hiring and some of the layoffs that we've seen, and freezing vital communications at agencies cause great concern for the researchers in my state and disrupt the important work that they do. The impact and potential impacts for North Carolina and our country cannot be understated. Our state and local economies depend on our research enterprise and federal support for the world-class and life-saving research that takes place in my district. The researchers and outstanding workers, students, and others who conduct this life-saving and life-changing research help keep the U.S. as a global leader in science and technology. And as we have heard from Dr. Wilson, we are losing ground. Investment in American public and private collaboration to advance the American innovation enterprise is a top priority of mine. And I'm very interested in how we can move that forward in a very, very divided Congress. I'm going to move on to an issue that hasn't been raised yet because, of course, I'm interested in how we fund NSF, how we're funding NIH, how we're going to fund DOE, and we're going to take those things up. But one of the other things I'm concerned about with budgets coming up and the cuts that we're looking at is how we will take care of our labs and our crumbling infrastructure. I represent 2 HBCUs. If you go into the labs that they have, where, there are students who are so eager to contribute to the scientific enterprise, they simply cannot afford the infrastructure to be able to give these bright young people the opportunities that they need. And so why don't we start with Dr. Parikh, because he came in to North Carolina and talked to some of our folks who are working on this pipeline, and then I'll open it up to the others.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And being from North Carolina, vinegar barbecue is my preference. When I think about how we can ensure that we have the infrastructure, I first of all have to compare it to my trip to China last year, where I saw investments in laboratories at universities that are first rate and they are deep. They're deep, right? It's not just one laboratory that has the latest mass spec or the latest piece of equipment, but rather throughout large universities and in first and second tier universities. And we haven't made that investment in too long. And so we have to make sure that as we go through what the budgeting exercise I know Congress has to do, that we have to prioritize. And science, if we are going to have the benefits of the accrual of the things that come from science, we have to make those investments.
Yes, Dr. Copan, I see you're nodding your head.
Indeed, the investment in the United States science and technology enterprise and our facilities for leading edge research are an absolute priority for the nation. And we've seen the crumbling of some of our key infrastructure and in areas that are so important for U.S. global leadership that we are out of capacity. And in many cases, U.S. scientists are going abroad to actually carry out the research that ultimately should be carried out at leading edge facilities in this nation.
Thank you. I see my time's expired and I yield back.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being with us today. I have a number of questions for all of you, but limited time, so I would like to dial in initially on a couple for Dr. Copan, if you would, please. Last year, I and a number of members of the committee here served on the AI task force. We produced our report at the end of the year. Over the course of 8 months or so, we had stakeholders from all sorts of different constituencies give us their ideas and inputs on how we should chart a course forward. And almost every single one of those, NIST came up. Everyone cited the need for NIST to be more heavily involved. And in one of your previous hats as a director of NIST, I know you have a deep understanding of the agency's role in establishing those standards. In your opinion, what specific resources, authorities, or policy directives does NIST require from Congress to effectively fulfill this role and ensure continued U.S. leadership in AI?
Thank you so much, Congressman. It's a real pleasure, and thank you for your service in that regard, looking to the future of artificial intelligence for our nation. The role that NIST plays is absolutely central. There are certainly new authorities and flexibilities that the agency can benefit from. Those include some of the upgrades that have been recommended through the changes in the Stevenson-Weidler Act to create greater opportunities for public-private partnership, greater opportunity for industry engagement, and more flexible collaboration approaches. In particular, as we look at the public-private partnerships necessary for U.S. standards leadership, in particular in artificial intelligence. I believe also that having the sustained investment by the nation in our leadership capacity for artificial intelligence, bringing together the capabilities of NIST, and being able to double down as a country to ensure that we can retain the leadership position in these key areas that we currently enjoy, but we know that the competition is not standing still.
Very good. All right, so now switching gears to your current hat at Colorado School of Mines. I know you've got extensive expertise in mineral and in energy extraction. We all know we see our over-dependence on China for a number of critical minerals, for metals and things like that. Some of the ideas of things are being slapped around there on potential tariffs on goods coming into the country that we get from China. We know there are a lot of these things we've got to have. We need to figure out how to do these things safely, successfully, economically, and obviously we've got to protect the environment in the course of that. China clearly doesn't have the same concern for human rights, for protection of the environment, or any of those things. So they're willing to overlook a lot of those environmental impacts. Are there emerging technologies or best practices that we could use that might more environmentally be responsible for mining domestically? Even some of these things, we mine them domestically and then we ship them offshore, to refine and then bring them back into the country. It seems hypocritical to me. We're concerned about the environment as long as it happens, somewhere else, we don't care. But I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Thank you so much for that question. The United States is so dependent on China for materials essential to our economy, including these types of devices that we rely upon for day-to-day communications, for advanced compute. The future of quantum computing and networking are also dependent on these critical materials to be provided. The U.S. has historically underinvested in innovation in the mining and extractive industries that relate to these types of materials. We need to rebuild our future workforce. I know that this committee is focused on the future of innovation, science, and technology, bringing together the federal agencies who have touch points around critical materials is going to be absolutely essential, that we coordinate between the Department of Energy, the Department of Interior, U.S. Geological Survey, that has such an important role on the Colorado School of Mines campus, the Department of Defense and the ability to use the Defense Production Act. All of these coordination opportunities, especially in the absence of a U.S. Bureau of Mines, is going to be essential to our nation. And I really am pleased that this committee is considering these issues of the future of critical materials and the future of workforce, including the Mining Schools Act that has recently been brought forward in both houses.
Great. Thank you,
Mr. Chairman and Congressman, if I could add, the University of Texas at El Paso, with the support of the Board of Regents, is restarting mining engineering. There are only, as a discipline and field of study, there are only 14 mining schools left in the United States, and soon there will be 15. And our intention is to increase the number of mining engineers for America by 30% from one university in El Paso, Texas.
Well, wonderful. And I look forward to following up with all of you on that. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Now I'd like to call on the representative from Oregon, Ms. Salinas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses and the ranking member and to you for holding today's hearing and setting the stage for us. I'm thrilled to be back on this committee for another term. We've had a really strong bipartisan commitment to support American leadership in the innovation economy. We've had incredible opportunities ahead in science and technology to bolster our global competitiveness, a lot of what you all have talked about, and create those new economic opportunities for all Americans. But I have to be honest, the Trump administration's recent actions have sown confusion and alarm throughout our nation's science and tech enterprise. These disruptions to federal research investment not only threaten our future economic success, but directly harm Americans from all regions of the United States. For example, they've disrupted the work to place wildfire detection cameras in remote locations around the Pacific Northwest. This directly impedes our ability to better understand, identify, and respond to wildfires across the Pacific Northwest. That's a lose-lose proposition, both for research and keeping people safe. But there are longer-term threats as well as to our leadership on emerging technologies and significant workforce implications. In recent years, we've emphasized a consortium model to push the envelope on critical emerging technologies, everything from semiconductors to quantum to AI. Oregon's colleges and universities are partners on NSF's AI research institutes, collaborating with institutions as far-flung as Kansas State, the University of Florida, and Georgia Tech. And one such institute includes a partnership with your institution, Dr. Wilson, at UTEP. So, Dr. Wilson, how do broad partnerships across regions and institution types strengthen our leadership in key emerging technologies like AI? And then following up, what unique challenges do these large collaborations face when funding for all or part of the efforts is thrown into question?
Thank you for the question. First of all, I think that, there's always a shift at a transition. Sometimes there are moments of pause. But with respect to contracts and grants that are already given, where a university may have been required to include a sub-piece that maybe the new administration doesn't like, the point is to move forward. And to not disrupt the science that is going on. With respect to large consortiums, no university can do everything. And we have strengths that we build on. The key is to forge vicious partnerships, if you will, with universities that have non-overlapping contiguities. And so bringing universities and researchers together and creating those synergies, identifying where they are, is a tremendous value. And it's a strength not only in the United States, but in universities in the West. I was struck in the science and engineering indicators this last year. If you look at there's a map of interrelationships on AI research, far beyond the United States. And the strength of the West is what we should be thinking about, not just strength in the United States. And I also think that the global South is another place where we should reach out to with respect to scientific research.
Thank you. In my district, one of our community colleges is a member of an AI research institute working on agricultural applications. Their role specifically focuses on workforce development and broadening participation. And this is a term that's caused a lot of confusion and anxiety in the wake of President Trump's recent executive orders on diversity. I worry that Trump's attacks on diversity will ultimately take career opportunities away from students in my district, many of whom come from rural areas that are economically disadvantaged. So I can't see how this would help our nation compete on the technologies of the future. Dr. Parikh, you spoke of the importance of strengthening our domestic STEM workforce. If we limit opportunities for children from a wide range of backgrounds to participate in these emerging fields, how will that affect our global competitiveness?
We're in a race with demographic behemoths. 1.4 billion people. We're 340-ish million people. We have to draw on the talents of every part of this country, whether it's Southeast Texas or the South Side of Chicago or anywhere else in this nation. And when we do that, when we pull that creativity, one of the reasons why the partnerships between universities is so powerful is that there are cultural differences between UTEP and other universities. And when we bring that together, we have incredible creativity that's created by bringing folks together. So we want to make sure that we're meeting folks where we are. I want every student in America to hear what Dr. Wilson said about the need for it is your birthright in this country to go as far as your brain power and your drive can take you in the sciences, because we need you.
Congressman, if I could just add, most first-generation college students start out at community college. A deep partnership between community colleges and exceptional research universities is the ticket to a dream and the pathway to success. We need to make sure those pathways stay open.
This question of the future of America's workforce needs to be entirely inclusive, needs to be looking at leveraging all the talent of America, but also bringing the brightest and best to this nation that are really willing to drive the future of innovation.
Thank you. My time's expired. I yield back.
Thank you very much. And now the representative from Ohio, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. And thank you to our witnesses for their time and testimony today. Sorry, I'm here in the corner. New for me as well. I'm honored to be serving in my second term on the Space Science and Technology Committee, united by our shared mission to secure and strengthen U.S. global leadership in cutting-edge technology. Today, we are here to assess the current state of the United States science and technology enterprise and explore strategies for maintaining our competitive edge in the global innovation race. Research and investment in new cutting-edge technologies serve as an indispensable pillar of progress, both here in the United States and across the globe, which I believe is without question. In 22, the United States led the world in research and development efforts, investing nearly $886 billion, which accounts for more than a third of the world's total spending in R&D. However, to maintain our leadership, we must confront the rising influence of our adversaries, particularly China. Over the last 2 decades, the Chinese Communist Party, as known as the CCP, has made aggressive strides in R&D, including a staggering 14% increase from 2020 to 2021. Over the CCP-backed national policies like Made in China 2025, 1,000 Talents Plan, and the 14th Five-Year Plan underscore why the United States must double down on investments in science and technology. Our leadership depends on sustained innovation and a commitment to pioneering advancements right here at home. Dr. Copan, in your stated remarks, you mentioned that the United States remains a leader in 7 of the 64 technology categories, while China leads in the other 57. What are these key technology sectors, and in your view, how can Congress and the administration work together to close this gap?
Thank you so much, Congressman, and thank you for your service on this committee. The U.S. is leading in areas that relate to quantum technologies, quantum compute, atomic clocks, and so precision timing technologies. In the life sciences and the biotech areas for vaccines, for genetic engineering, in nuclear medicine and related fields. In space technologies, including small satellites, and also in fields of artificial intelligence, including natural language processing. China's lead is in areas that are also essential to the global economy. There, we're looking at prowess in advanced manufacturing and in robotics. They have dramatically expanded their capabilities in areas that relate to the critical materials question that we discussed earlier. So for the United States now to look strategically at how do we double down on our strengths and build on those, maintain a position of leadership. But also let's look at those fields that are important to the U.S. economy. The needs for America's workforce to be fully brought into play, and then to participate in the innovation economy through advanced manufacturing and through important new initiatives such as the initiative at NIST that brings together industry and digital twin technologies to look at the future of the semiconductor industry.
Thank you for that answer. Nothing would make me happier than seeing parity across the board with technology and innovation and also workforce development, which we are down in across the board within this country. So nothing would make me happier, and I believe everyone within this country for stability purposes to have parity across the board. So thank you. This question is for any of the witnesses. It is my view that public-private partnerships are essential to facilitating groundbreaking discoveries in science and technology, as we have already seen several private sector companies work well with the government. In what ways can Congress address any potential roadblocks that we may face to better facilitate additional discoveries in science and technology while working with some of these public and private partnerships?
Let me begin. I think that truly these are essential. There are new models that are necessary, and I think having repeatable approaches for public-private partnership with flexible tools and contracting vehicles is going to be also essential. I'm really proud in Colorado that we have a quantum hub that is looking at leveraging the largest quantum economy in the United States and looking to take that leadership position forward. So bringing together the academic leadership, bringing together the private sector and leveraging one another's talents as well as funding to actually accelerate this process is going to be essential.
Thank you. I am out of time. Thank you all for your testimony today. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. And now next, Representative Fushi of North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The ranking member for holding this committee hearing today. And thank you also to our witnesses for your testimonies and for appearing before us now this afternoon. So last fall, Republicans from the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee released a staff report asserting that the NSF allocates approximately 1/4 of its recent annual budget to so-called left-wing ideological crusades. They arrived at this number by applying a broad search of approximately 200 terms to NSF's database of abstracts. So let me share some of those words with you. Disability, women, underrepresented, diversity, bias, minority, barrier, systemic, Hispanic. This is a complete ignorance of science. Of course, words like bias and systemic can show up across disciplines that have nothing to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. In my opinion, this is a demonization of all research, be it social and behavioral sciences or biology and medicine, that has anything to do with people who aren't white, able-bodied men. It appears that the goal here is to turn back the clock, back to the 1950s, including putting Americans with disabilities in institutions to languish. Let's not forget that many STEM fields are still only about 20% women an even lower percentage of minorities, making this whole attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion an attack on our ability to have the STEM workforce we need to compete globally. It's bad enough that Congress is wasting taxpayer money with this Stalinistic report. Now we understand that NSF leadership, whether on their own or at the direction of someone in the White House, has instructed its own staff to search its entire database of 40,000 awards using the exact same words from this report's list in order to weed out diversity, equity, and inclusion. I had great respect for NSF leadership. This has got to stop. The integrity of the agency, the integrity of its merit review process is sustaining tremendous damage, and the damage to the U.S. scientific enterprise will be irreversible. So, Dr. Parikh, surely you are hearing concerns about NSF ripple across the country. Do you want to add any of your own thoughts here?
Thank you. Thank you, Congresswoman Fushi. The National Science Foundation was created in 1950 by Congress, and it was created with the idea that we are going to invest in science in the way that we did during the war, during a time of peace, and that we're going to make basic science breakthroughs that are going to drive us forward. And that simple little vision has a profound implication of building modern society today. And when I look at the description of the National Science Foundation in that report that you referenced, it doesn't jive with reality for me. Those numbers are not correct in terms of those investments. More importantly, the work of the National Science Foundation and the leadership that's there, who was chosen by President Trump in his first term, has been such that it is driving forward public-private partnerships. It is looking for identifying the missing millions of students across this country who should be in the sciences, and it's been working very hard to ensure that we are making breakthroughs in those important areas. So I just think that there's a disconnect between what's written in that report and what the National Science Foundation is for and what it's doing today.
Thank you. Dr. Wilson, would you care to add?
Yes, thank you. I've read the report as well, and I identified some of the same things that you did. Just because somebody, my institution is a Hispanic serving institution under Title V of the Higher Education Act. That appears in probably every grant that's submitted, which means that even if it is a piece of research on graphene particles, that it will show up as in that report. So I question the methodology of the report, and I completely understand staff resources are limited on the Hill. I get that. But I wouldn't say that report was particularly dispositive. And if we're going to do word searches to identify, to eliminate large numbers that you don't need to look at and then look at the others, okay, fine. But let's go forward, not try to renegotiate grants and contracts that where we've already got students hired, we've already got PhDs doing the work, and where this was probably something required and added on by the NSF. So let's move forward, not backwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record an article this week from Nature entitled "Exclusive: How NSF is Scoring Research Grants for Violations of Trump's Orders," and from the Washington Post entitled "Here Are the Words Putting Science in the Crosshairs of Trump's Orders."
So ordered. And now Representative Rouser from North Carolina. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, let me say it's a great honor and privilege to have the opportunity to serve on this committee. I appreciate that opportunity very much, and have been very interested in the testimony that's been provided today and the answers, questions and answers. Mr. Hammond, you said something that struck me, and I'd like for you to elaborate on it. To paraphrase, it was something to the effect of in China, the regulatory barriers or non-barriers are such that they can bring something to market fairly quickly, whereas here we have a number of different regulatory barriers. Can you expound on that a little bit so that the average person back home understands what you're referring to there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. traditionally, we've made this sharp distinction between basic research and applied research, and my view is that the distinction is not as clear-cut as it first seems. Across technology categories, there's a lot of learning by doing that happens by trying to manufacture technology at scale. So the fact that America has leading robotics companies, leading drone companies, leading batteries technologies, we're at a disadvantage if we're not producing millions of units of those technologies. What we have drone companies, but we can't produce the number of drones that China does. And when they produce that at that volume, they learn how to make costs go down, how to improve quality. And so that, if we want to accelerate science, we ought to accelerate real investment in the real economy. And I'll give AI as an example. Just as we announced Stargate, China last week announced a 1 trillion yuan, $140 billion investment in AI infrastructure, a state-sponsored initiative. That compute will largely come from NVIDIA H20 and B20 chips and foreign cloud providers. And so it's now imperative that we cut off access to those chips, which are designed to get around existing export controls. Because right now our lead is in hardware, and to your question's point, China is adding hundreds of gigawatts of energy to their grid every year. We're actually going backwards. Yeah. And if they catch up on AI, they'll leapfrog us on energy.
Yeah. Well, in China, if they want to build a canal, they just go and build a canal. They're not worried about, all the issues that we're concerned about here in this country. And certainly that gives them a competitive advantage in that area. We have to find ways to overcome. So let me transition to K through 12 STEM education. I grew up in North Carolina, incredible UNC system, community college system. A lot of thought was put into that back in the 40s and the 50s, and we have really benefited tremendously over the years. Research Triangle Park, obviously, is a product of all that. A lot of folks moving into North Carolina doing all kinds of research. But STEM, what is the real problem there? Why do we not have the advancements there? Why do we not have the numbers that we need there? Is that a K through 12 curriculum issue? What's different today versus 30 years ago or 40 years ago?
I think in so many ways, having a national culture that values STEM and really encourages the pathways of every American, everyone who is interested to pursue their dreams and to see the possibilities for the future. We spoke a little bit earlier on about the role that the community college system has together with higher education. But if that pathway is not really valued, and if that is not reinforced within the K through 12 system, then America's future workforce remains uninspired. And so I think having that combination of pathways for all, the inspiration, the leadership opportunity, the financial opportunities as well, for people to first of all have a dream and then be able to go for it is going to be essential.
Yeah. Yes. Either. Go ahead.
I think there may be something different as well, and the world has changed. You mentioned the year 1940, so it would have been just on the cusp of Europe was in flames, and we hadn't reached. The United States was not yet in the war, and my grandfather flew in the First World War with a high school degree, and airplanes were pretty rickety craft. And his technological advancement was to synchronize the machine gun with the propeller arc. My father enlisted right after the Second World War, and he was a mechanic on the hottest jet at the time, the F-84 Thunderjet. When I started at the United States Air Force Academy, man had already walked on the moon. My grandfather was born before the Wright brothers and lived to see a man walk on the moon. It's not just, it's that the world has changed. 24% of the jobs in America today require some kind of STEM talent. That wasn't the case in 1903 or 1940.
Yeah. That reminds me, my grandfather built airplanes in World War II.
I want to talk to you after, sir.
My time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Now, Representative Sykes from great state of Ohio.
Thank you, Chairman Babin and Ranking Member for this hearing. I appreciate the conversation about the Wright brothers because it is a perfect time to remind everyone that Ohio is first in flight. And since all of my North Carolina folks are gone, no one is going to argue with me about that. To our witnesses, thank you so much for being here today. It's great to be on this committee and engaging in such dynamic conversations and really important conversations. Is why I chose to come back here and looking forward to being the ranking member on the investigations and oversight as we are making sure that we're spending the money from the CHIPS and Science Act appropriately. And it is especially important for me as I have a tech hub in my community. Ohio's 13th Congressional District was the recipient of the Akron Sustainable Polymers Tech Hub to receive $51 million to put together new sustainable polymers. If folks don't know what polymers are, think everything that you touch or plastics. But most recently, the EDA, the Economic Development Administration, awarded $3 million federal grants for their Good Jobs Challenge with the Greater Akron Chamber. And thinking about states and communities like mine, districts who have working class families who have literally built our country from the bottom up, and for whom our investment in the next generation of research and innovation will help create pathways to new, innovative, good paying, and often union jobs. I'm deeply concerned about the millions of dollars that are on the line that are now frozen or in flux and chaos of what is going to happen. And the efforts from the Trump administration to halt the distribution of federal grant funding could and has already had devastating impact on huge investments coming into Northeast Ohio. Last week with the announcement of the freeze, it wreaked havoc all across the country. Ohio's 13th district was no different. I received a very frenzied call from the Greater Akron Chamber asking about their $51 million and whether or not we'll be able to rebuild sustainable polymers in our community. And so, Mr. Copan, I want to ask you about this uncertainty in funding. You know, we have these really exciting, innovative programs, but we don't know what we're going to do. I mean, how is this challenging our ability to be innovative in this country and competitive with global partners?
Thank you so much for that question. And as a former fellow Ohioan, I really appreciate your comments about first in flight. The opportunities that we have for these major public-private partnerships that have the potential of driving the future of research and innovation in this country is absolutely essential. We are in this unfortunate period of uncertainty. I believe that having clear communications about the future so plans can be appropriately promulgated is going to be essential. But it's important also for these teams that have worked so hard and have built coalitions that will be lasting coalitions for the country, also need to be nurtured. And so we know that we'll get through this time of uncertainty. I believe that one of the important things that has come out of the National Science Foundation's efforts around engines, these major EDA hub programs, the hydrogen hubs that we've seen around the country, are really the wave of the future. It's going to be important for us to be able to create scale in this nation and to innovate at scale, and to bring people from all parts of society together, that they can see themselves as part of the Polymers Hub, that they can see themselves as part of the Quantum Hub and these other opportunities nationwide. It's going to take leadership, but it's going to take communication from the top.
Thank you. And your comments reminded me of the fact that in the district last week, I was also a part of the Science and Business Innovation Summit. It was held at Walsh University. Dr. Collins is convening entities and organizations from national to state to local folks so that they can also get grant funding at a state innovation grant so that they can pull together something similar to a tech hub on our state scale. And in that meeting, it was really encouraging to see so many partners engaged and excited and talking about our workforce and what we're going to do for the future, honing it in our educational institutions. But Mr. Parikh, I do want to talk to you about, what advice would you ask me to give them? They asked me for my advice and willingly did, but as someone who's participating in advancing science, what advice would you give a startup entity like this as they move on?
Oh, it's a great question, and it's one that's being formulated all over the country. This is what I find exciting is no matter where I go, I see these partnerships happening at the state and local level. One of the things I'd look for is a template. So as they're developing this, don't let it be that they've had to reinvent the wheel. What happens in Akron can work in Cleveland, can work in Columbus. So let's see if we can create templates for governance that allow us to mix dollars from the federal government, the state government, philanthropy, industry. That is incredibly powerful. It's a strength of our country that no other country has, and we should rely on those local leaders to figure out those templates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yield back.
Okay, now I'd like to call on Representative Harrigan of North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for your testimony today. I found it very enlightening, and I'd just like to share one of the reasons that I wanted to join this particular committee is because I care about American dominance. I want us to win as a country. And so much of what this committee has under its jurisdiction is dual use. It drives what will be our future market economy, and it also drives the future of defense. And I also sit on armed services. And one of the things I'm greatly concerned about from the armed services perspective is our defense industrial base, where we have become very, very good at creating the high-cost problems to our enemy's low-cost solutions. We are losing the economics of our conflicts, and by extension, over the last 30 years, we have lost our conflicts and arguably our ability to deter conflict moving forward. And Dr. Wilson, I was incredibly disturbed by your testimony, where you said we are behind in 37 of 44 critical technologies, that we are losing the technology battle. Chairman Babin talked about how our government, our people, and our private sector are collectively investing over $800 billion a year in research and development. And in your words, and in the words of everyone else too, we are falling behind. We are losing the battle to win research and development in this country. And the problem that I see, like when we lose the economics of our wars, we then lose our wars. If we lose the economics of our research and development, we lose the future market economy. That's everything to us. How do we change this paradigm and make sure that these incredibly high investments that the American people and American companies are making are actually delivering winning outcomes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a couple of things. What you made there in your last sentence is probably one of the most important things we haven't talked about here, which is technology transfer from federally funded research, whether that's at universities or national labs, out into innovative businesses. And I have to say, I don't think higher education does that very well. There are very few universities that really do that well. And national labs, honestly, are even worse. And so I would suggest that might be an area where this committee really drilled down. So how to accelerate the transfer of technology at the speed of innovation. And there may be some things to do differently. And I may disagree with Walter on this one. I actually think that some of the federal laws with respect to intellectual property need to change. From my perspective, the value of the research as a university is in the research and the development of the PhDs through doing research. We do a lousy job of getting that IP out into companies. So things like Bayh-Dole may actually limit the amount of research that can be done or that can be transferred out because of the way it's all set up. What if we rethought this? What if there was a national IP bank for any federally funded research, and we didn't rely on distributed small single-person offices at universities to try to get that technology out into the ecosystem? And the same for technologies developed at national laboratories. It would be a very different approach, and I think ultimately could benefit the researchers in the universities. But let the universities focus on doing the research and developing the talent, and let someone else commercialize the IP. The second is IP usually transfers on 2 feet. So how do you get more entrepreneurs into the labs as entrepreneurs and residents in there, not necessarily doing a master's degree or whatever, but actually just engaging with those scientists and understanding what's there to go out and start their next company. So I think there's a way to really restructure this, but it's going to require some big thinking and some heavy lifting from this committee.
Thanks for that, Dr. Wilson. Would anybody else like to opine?
let me double down on that because I do believe that that the legislative frameworks that we have around the Bayh-Dole Act are very helpful and really have stood the United States in great stead. The United States actually already has a repository of all the intellectual properties that are available from federally funded research at universities as well as from our federal laboratories. But we do have a need to coordinate much more effectively. We need to modernize the legislation. I mentioned the Stevenson-Weidler Act in particular and the results of the NIST Green Paper, that those findings are as relevant today as they were several years ago. And so I believe that that stimulating the entrepreneurial connection between our research enterprise, the sources of capital, with the researchers who really know their technology, and I fully agree that technology transfer really happens on two legs. But if you're a researcher at a place like NIST, my former agency, and you're working on something that's entrepreneurial, you wind up having to quit NIST to be able to work on a startup.
I'm out of time, but thank you all very much. Really appreciate the witnesses, and I yield back, Chairman.
You bet. Thank you very much. Next, Representative Amo of Rhode Island.
Thank you, Chairman Babin, and I look forward to working with you over this Congress. And I'm honored to serve in this Congress as a new ranking member on the Subcommittee on the Environment. And where possible, I look forward to working with Subcommittee Chair Scott Franklin, especially since we agree that America is blessed with emerging technologies that must be deployed in an environmentally sound manner that is sustainable for future generations. However, as we hold this first hearing of the 119th Congress, I do have real worry, deep worry about the state of America's leadership in science and technology. And look, we know that the United States has led innovation since our early days. And I'm lucky to say, being from Rhode Island, that my state has been front and center. And it's also Black History Month, which I want to recognize by mentioning Philip Downing, who once lived in Providence and who made it easier to send out our mail with the bright idea for the blue mailboxes that we see on street corners. And so our country has done great things. We discovered flight, we put a man on the moon, we created the internet. The irony of innovation, though, and it's a great irony, is that others will fill the void if we don't keep at it. And that's what's happened. You all know this. Between 1960 and 2020, our country's share of global research and development spending plummeted from 69% to 31%. And as the United States has lost ground, competitors have caught up. I've heard it in this hearing. We've talked about China, and we've talked about their work to be the second largest spender on research and development, skyrocketing from accounting for almost 5% of global R&D spending in 2000 to nearly 25% in 2020. And so if there's one thing that unites government, industry, and academia, it's that we must reverse this trend and restore federal funding for basic research. Thankfully, Congress has increased authorization levels for key agencies like the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. But it is congressional malpractice to authorize at one level and then appropriate funding that fails to meet this critical moment. Now, in the last 2 weeks, our scientific community has been turned upside down by President Trump's executive orders and an illegal attempt to freeze federal funding. It is preventing research in my district and across the country. My office has received calls from federally funded researchers who are understandably worried that they will not be able to carry out work that they were approved and funded to do. Across our country, grant review panels at the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health have been canceled. These delays, without any sort of action from my Republican colleagues, are causing the United States to fall behind. And so to my colleagues, I just ask, is this pause normal? Is it warranted? Is loyalty to the agenda at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue worth the cost of China beating us? Is it worth delaying a potential cure for disease or a breakthrough that makes America the envy of the world? Why would my colleagues let this happen? what is the end goal. We have a role. We are sent to Congress to get to work on these problems and drive at innovation and solutions for the future. So, the question that I have, Dr. Parikh, is how does the Trump federal funding freeze destabilize scientific discovery and the early careers of researchers, and how will it undermine the United States' already tenuous leadership in science?
Yeah, thank you for the question. What I've seen over the past 2 weeks has been just the incredible uncertainty amongst the scientific community. And sometimes it's uncertainty without a concrete thing. Sometimes the pause was going to happen, then it doesn't happen, then it might happen, it might not happen. The concrete thing is that most research is continuing in the country, but, and this is a huge but, is the uncertainty has caused a lot of folks, particularly early career scientists, to rethink, is this the right place for me? Because graduate students, postdocs, the people who do the work in the sciences are living paycheck to paycheck. They just are. And so when this lack of a certainty happens, even if it's for a period of 2 or 3 weeks, it leaves a scar. It leaves a scar and a bit of broken trust in this process. And I think that those folks are going to go on to work in the aerospace industry. They're going to go on to work in AI. Everything that we care about and that we're talking about in this hearing in terms of our competition. And it's a self-inflicted wound. It's not necessary. If we could talk about it from the top and say science remains a priority and we're going to continue and that this is the concrete thing that's going to happen, that would make such a difference.
Well, I know my time is up, but I want to underscore that last sentiment. This is a self-inflicted wound. And with that, I yield back my time.
Time expired. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to call on Representative Fong from the great state of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look forward to working with you in my second term on this committee to make sure that America remains a global leader in research and development. Dr. Wilson, I represent California's Aerospace Valley. So I have the Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake. We go up to Mojave Air and Spaceport. We go to NASA Armstrong, and then we have Edwards Air Force Base. Certainly a lot of conversation about AI, quantum, commercial space, and now hypersonics is becoming a lot more in the conversation as a national priority. Started launch, tested the first reusable hypersonics vehicle, Boom Supersonic, just tested the first civil supersonic jet, the XB-1. Certainly a lot of conversation about public-private partnership as well as the need for DoD collaboration. I was wondering, with your unique perspective as president of UTEP, Secretary of U.S. Air Force, member of Congress, how can we foster more collaboration from NASA with the Department of Defense, as well as allow NASA and other science agencies to attract even more greater participation from the private sector?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there's a number of mechanisms that can work, but it requires the leaders of those entities to want to work together. We used to, when I was the Secretary of the Air Force, we used to call them family meetings. We would get together and every quarter review our portfolios. I would do that with the director of NASA and also the director of the CIA in science and technology. There's some very close relationships there, as well as with the National Reconnaissance Office. And driving forward, getting people to work together and the services to work with each other to advance research and development very quickly. That actually is possible to do, to force people to work together. The Secretary of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, we used to get along quite well. We'd have, unlike our predecessors, I guess, and we have breakfast together every 2 weeks with no agenda and no staff. Actually, it terrified the Pentagon. But we got a lot done, starting with research and development, and we stripped 5 years out of hypersonic tests by combining our research efforts, telling our people to work together, go fast, innovate, and take the best. So I think it can happen. It requires that kind of leadership.
Do you have anything to add, Mr. Copan?
Yes, indeed. And a number of our conversations today have been about coordinating across the interagency. That's a perfect example of the kind of partnership that was necessary. When I was director at NIST, We had very regular gatherings with the leadership of the Department of Energy, with the National Science Foundation leadership, and with the National Institutes of Health leadership for exactly the same reasons. Having a functional interagency for the United States and to bring together our resources in ways that are not duplicative, but where we seek synergy, where we seek opportunities to accelerate the science and technology agenda of the United States, because we have that common interest. And in many ways, it's the people working together that can accomplish great things, but they also need the support of this committee as we look at the kind of legislative barriers that we sometimes run into. And so as we look at the authorities that are available and the new kinds of partnership options that are going to be important for the future of government, I look forward to the great work of this committee.
If I could delve in a little deeper, a lot of what you're saying is individual centric. It depends on the leaders to bring people together, to facilitate meetings, to facilitate conversations. Certainly our challenge is looking forward, not in the short term, but what is our challenge 30 years from now? Where do we want America to be? As my colleagues would say, we want America to be dominant in all phases of science and research and development, and then work backwards. So what are those barriers? What are the structural challenges? And are there things that we need to codify in place to facilitate those partnerships?
So let me begin with the return on investment legislation that was submitted to this committee some years back, and that update the Stevenson-Weidler Act, and there are certainly other opportunities for flexibility in mechanisms. We haven't spoken very much today about the role of the Office of Science and Technology Policy and the role of the National Science and Technology Council. The convenings of those interagencies and bringing together these leaders focused on the future of the enterprise, looking to coordinate. We talked about the mining sector a little bit earlier on, and the necessity of bringing together all of these parties that are important stakeholders and bringing together the funding opportunities, but also shared priorities nationally.
Mr. Hammond, did you have anything to add?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Fung, in the remaining time. Just for context, in 2016, I published a paper called Make America Boom Again, the case for bringing back supersonics. So I know quite a lot about the supersonic issue. And I think it's actually a good archetype for why science and progress has slowed down since the 70s, because in 1973, the FAA outlawed, through regulatory decree, supersonic flight over land. There are now new technologies and potential technologies to make low-boom supersonic jets, and that's an area where proactive forward-leaning regulation can make a big difference.
I appreciate that. We're trying to get a supersonic corridor through my district, so I appreciate all the guidance and input. My time's run out, but I look forward to work with all of you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. And now Representative Subramaniam from Virginia, Commonwealth of Virginia. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Congressman Subramaniam. So I want to thank the chair and everyone for this hearing today. I think this is a really critical topic, making sure that we have leadership in science and technology. It's more important than ever. And, honestly, I'm a little bit concerned right now, and I know others have expressed that concern. And what I'm concerned about is what I'm hearing from my constituents, because we have a lot of research facilities, we have a lot of technology companies in Northern Virginia, and they are scared and they are concerned about what's going to happen next. A lot of people who rely on NSF grants now are not sure if they're going to receive those grants in full. A lot of people who rely on federal funding for research are now not sure. And these aren't just pet projects. We're talking about flu vaccines every year. We're talking about eradicating infectious diseases. Really important stuff. And so I really want. My question, and maybe Dr. Parikh, you could answer this, is, someone told me that even a month of lab time that's delayed or taken away because of a freeze could actually cost a research project many months, if not years. Could you tell me a little bit more about that, and how true that is?
When there isn't funding, when there is a freeze, you can see things like the lack of being able to hire a new postdoctoral researcher. You can see things like having to take experiments, and some things can be put into stasis, but some things cannot. They have to just be restarted. And so that has real effects. And so the 2-week gap doesn't turn into 2 weeks later, it turns into 2 or 4 or 6 or 8. That said, one of the things that is worrying me is that the uncertainty is there, not yet these gaps. And so the uncertainty can cause problems as well, because sometimes, even if you have funding, you say, I'm not sure about it, so I won't make that hire today. I won't buy that piece of equipment today. And so that's an uncertainty thing. And that can be fixed with just leadership communicating.
Sure. And what would the consequences of halting clinical trials that provide patients critical treatments that they might not get anywhere else? Like, what would that impact be? Like, what would the results of that be, especially on our leadership in science and technology?
If there were, that would be a huge challenge, because we are at this moment in the leadership place in life sciences and biotech. But I can tell you it's a tenuous lead with our competitors in China. That said, I was really happy to see some clarity from the NIH leadership saying that that clinical trials will continue even during this time of transition.
And I just want to talk a little bit about what I heard from my constituents. I had a town hall a few days ago, and over the past 2 weeks, I've gotten hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of inquiries and letters and emails from people just really concerned. One constituent said they work in electron microscopy research, which is nearly fully funded by the federal government, and their industry is terrified. They feel like they cannot do this research anymore, and we will lose a lot of ground on this front. A young biomedical engineering graduate isn't sure about her career choices anymore. That's a in-demand field, but she's afraid that she's going to lose her salary and get laid off, and that students like her could leave the industry altogether. And so, we're talking about a brain drain in science and technology in this country, and a nurse and even a whole research facility is worried about our ability to address and respond to pandemics, because we're underfunding health research. And so, with all the challenges that we are facing right now, delaying federal funding, freezing federal funding, I think is going to cause irreparable damage to our country and our leadership in science and technology. And it could cost the lives of patients. It could cost lives around the world, because we are seen as a leader on science and technology. So I hope this committee, and I hope we can work in a bipartisan way to fund science and technology, stop these mass layoffs, stop these freezes, and work together to be leaders in this space. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to call on Representative Herodopoulos from great state of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate first that you put 4 really qualified people before us in our first committee meeting. It's very much appreciated. As a freshman member of the Congress, we're excited to work with you. And I happen to chair the space subcommittee. Looking forward to working with each of you. And your valuable testimony means a lot to us as we get started this year in these new challenges. I wanted to get first into the idea, if I could, to the Secretary of the Air Force, Ms. Wilson. Obviously, we face a major threat from China, and that threat is growing each day. And as you mentioned in your comments earlier, some of the areas of critical concern that we're actually behind China. And of course, our goal, as mentioned before, is to be space dominant. And now the communist dictatorship that is China is rapidly moving forward, and we want to make sure we not only catch up in those areas, but surpass them to protect our troops in the field. My question to you, and I'd also ask Mr. Hammond to comment on this as well, if you don't mind. What are the consequences if we don't meet these challenges? What might we face from the Chinese?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With respect to space, any future conflict will extend to space. And I was the first, I'm the former secretary. I'm now the president of a university, but I was the first secretary of the Air Force to use space and warfighting in the same sentence, and to be kind of allowed to do that publicly. So conflict will extend to space. So we've got to understand the threat, develop the strategies to meet that threat, and then develop the capabilities to prevail and deter conflict. So failure to do so compromises our national security and creates instability in the world. Now, I would also say there are some people who think that this can all be handled by commercial technologies, and it can't. And we can go into that in more detail if you wish.
Mr. Hammond?
Space is a testament to the ways in which the private sector is taking the lead. Where in the past, where NASA may have funded the Apollo program, we're now doing similar and actually more impressive feats through private initiative. And so the commercialization of space is core to promoting U.S. science, including through venture capital, through new startups in everything from asteroid mining to data centers in space. And I think the commercial approach is also a way to ensure that space remains peaceful, because commerce often promotes peace.
And if I could, Mr. Hammond, to follow up, you mentioned earlier in your comments about DEI, the amount of money that's been spent over the last few years. I know you didn't maybe have enough time to talk about before. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, sure. The earlier comments that the numbers, a quarter of NSF grants being DEI related were false, or I think are totally untrue. I'd be happy to submit to the record an independent study from Leif Rasmussen from the Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology, which shows replicates essentially what the Senate study found. All these terms, Latinx, intersectional, marginalized, disparity, equity, go up and to the right. They look like NVIDIA's stock price. And while it is true that you dig deep and you might see nothing there, but I dug up an example as we were during these proceedings. There was a study from NSF's Cognitive Behavioral Division looking at the title of the study is Clarifying the Role of Inflammation in Social Prejudice. The thesis is that inflammation causes social prejudice. So what they did is they administered an influenza vaccine, and they did a psychology study and found that people who got the shot had more in-group bias. In other words, vaccines make you racist. Right? This is not actual science. This is a $200,000 grant in supposed behavioral science. This sets science back, and it's a massive distraction, and it's also demoralizing to academic faculty.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond. And again, to President Wilson, real quick, if you could give me your recommendation on how do we make sure we are the leaders in space. If you had your 1 minute kind of soapbox and said, how do we lead it once again, what's your soapbox message to everyday Americans?
I think it's going to take a lot of, on the civil side and the national security side, it is to advance knowledge and its application, to rapidly get technologies to the warfighter where needed. I think I'd probably focus on those two things. I do have to say something about this issue about these, this, what NSF is doing with respect to minority representation and so forth. 65 million Americans are Hispanic. 65 million. It's the fastest growing racial or ethnic group in America. 19% of our workforce, but only 6% of our PhDs. We either reach this next generation and inspire them to participate in science and engineering, or we will lose as a nation. That's what's at stake. And that's what universities like UTEP are seeking to do with the support of the state of Texas, National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, and others.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Madam President. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. And now Representative Rivas from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a new member of Congress, I'm excited to serve on this committee, and I want to start with Dr. Wilson, which is a perfect segue to what your previous comment. I'm the only Latina with a background in STEM in this Congress. I'm a double E, and uplifting the STEM workforce is an issue that's personal to me and one that I have worked on over the years as an engineer, as a nonprofit leader, as a California state legislator. While I didn't attend a Hispanic serving institution, I've been very supportive of HSIs, especially in California. In the San Fernando Valley, we have Cal State Northridge, and that has received millions in federal funding for its HSI STEM equity programs. And I'm familiar with UTEP's, being a top-tier research university, Hispanic serving institution, and all that you've done to increase diversity in STEM. But as you mentioned, UTEP doesn't have a DEI office, but you have an Institute of Hispanic Student Success, and UTEP is home to leading scholars in diversity and science. You've received, millions in federal funding, NSF grants, to help other universities understand what they can do to create more equity in STEM, which is what the E in DEI stands for, right? And so, but recently, you know, the administration has rescinded 2 Biden executive orders that provide support for Hispanic serving institutions. And with all of this uncertainty over, you know, NSF funding and DEI and all of that, you know, I'm concerned for institutions like yours that have received millions of dollars for programs, especially in diversity and science. And so my question for you is, what would the impact be on UTEP and its students if all outreach and support and federal funding for HSIs were eliminated?
Congresswoman, we've taken a different approach at UTEP. We don't have a DEI office, and I think that what UTEP has done has been much more effective, and the results show that. We started out this has taken place over 35 years, and we started out with multiple regression analyses of our student body and understanding what are the things and what are the factors that are most important to student success, and then in a very boring and systematic way, implementing those things in a comprehensive way. So we haven't gone in the direction that I think is the concern. I do think that there's a lot of confusion about what DEI is and what it is not, and that may be an area where things can clarify.
Like I mentioned that, you know, you have NSF funding to create more equity in STEM. What's confusing about that with?
We have a number of federally funded programs, like we lead the Computing Alliance of Hispanic Serving Institutions, as an example, a network of 70 institutions that are intended to try to engage more students and get them involved in STEM. And so I don't see, you know, most of the DEI movement is over the last 4 years, and we can read the popular books on them and so forth, but they're quite different from the inclusive excellence strategies pursued by universities like UTEP.
I think other universities don't serve majority Hispanic or other minorities. Like I attended MIT that had a diversity office and provided the support and student success programs like yours does, and probably learn from institutions like yours. And that's a DEI office, right? Because we are not, the university is not majority Hispanic. But the administration is also proposing to eliminate Department of Education, which is where HSI funding comes from. How would that impact UTEP?
Well, certainly Title V funding, Pell Grants, and all of those things are absolutely vital to higher education. There's absolutely no question about that, and would require congressional action in order to change those things.
Okay, thank you for your response. I'm running out of time, but I really believe that we're shooting ourselves in the foot, like others have said, by potential federal funding freezes for successful programs like yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Kennedy from great state of Utah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the ranking member as well. It's great to be here on this committee, and I'm honored to be here with you. And thank you to the witnesses. You've been sitting there for a long time and listening to us come and go, and I'm impressed with your physiologic potency to be able to tolerate not only the questions intellectually, but also to be able to sit there for so long. Utah is fast becoming a leader in science and technology. In fact, we have our Silicon Slopes to compete with Silicon Valley, and I'm proud of the 1,000 businesses that are actually represented there. And part of that infrastructure is a reflection, and I'll ask my two academics when it comes to Ms. Wilson and Mr. Copan. I'm curious about the pipeline of students that are coming into your organizations. All 4 of you have testified about the significant challenges we have on the international stage to keep up. What I'm concerned about is the quality of our education, which we've talked about in this committee from K through 12. And when a child learns in 2nd and 3rd grade that they should be scared of math, then they're very hesitant to explore any further in that. I'm a family doctor. I went through medical school, pre-med. I did the physics. I did the organic and inorganic chemistry, and I know most, if not all of you, have done those sort of things as well. although the economics professor, maybe, I don't know how many physics classes you took to get through the economics associated with that, but what I'm concerned about, particularly with COVID lockdowns, we've talked about spending freezes, but we swallowed the pill of COVID lockdowns, and our children for a generation may have significant academic deficiencies because of the fear of a virus, which turned out to be very different from what we thought. So the academic environment in the college arena is reflected significantly by the children in elementary school. And my question is what can we do on that level to make sure that children can go into courses like physics and deep math like calculus 1, 2, and 3, and so on, and that they're not scared to do these things later on. So Ms. Wilson, if you would, Dr. Wilson, if you would start, and then Dr. Copan, if you would follow with answers on that, because I'm really concerned that children actually learn early not to go into these subjects that we need our engineers to go into.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some people go into early childhood education because they don't like math and science.
Right.
And I have friends who would tell me that. There's some things that are working in West Texas. One is 25 years ago or so, they created the Collaborative for Academic Excellence. 70% of the teachers in West Texas were educated at UTEP. No other community I've ever lived in has there been this close a connection between the school districts, the community college, and the university. And the university can't sit there and say, well, the kids aren't graduating with what they need from K to 12 because we educated the teachers. We better look in the mirror if we think that. And rather than blaming each other, people got together and focused initially on teacher quality. And we also have an agreement on sharing data so that if a group of students don't do well in freshman chemistry at UTEP, we know who their high school chemistry teachers were so that we can go back and say, how do we raise the level of all the boats? And that's why West Texas has one of the lowest income levels of any region of Texas, but one of the highest college post-high school college attendance levels in the state of Texas. And so there are ways to facilitate that collaboration and have universities and community college really focus on teacher quality.
Thank you. Dr. Copan.
Let me add to that, and I do agree that it's so important for leading universities like Colorado School of Mines, which is a highly selective university. And so we have a pipeline of incoming students that represents the best of the best in the United States. And we are a state university as well, so we have obligations regionally. We have an obligation and partnerships at the K through 12 level, similarly to build and to assure that the schools that are part of the feeder system are qualifying their graduates to join partnerships at the community college level to ensure that every credit that a student will take at a community college will transfer, because we have worked together to ensure that an Associates of Engineering program is fully qualified and has been vetted jointly with Colorado School of Mines. We're also very proud of the fact that in the United States we have the highest return on investment on education. There's a lot of people who are concerned about higher ed. Is it worth it? And so looking at the student success aspects and engaging then with the federal laboratories, engaging with Idaho National Lab, and ensuring that our students also have the opportunity to work in fields that are meaningful, that will prepare them for the future success in the workforce.
Thank you for those answers. And Mr. Chair, I'll yield back in just a moment. I think if we looked at Chinese elementary students, we may see some of the reasons why we have a generation of distinctions, and that social influencing seems to be more important in some of our educational curriculums than it does to take these hard sciences. And there's a good reason why they call them hard sciences. They are very difficult. But I appreciate your efforts and what you've testified for us. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I'd like to call on Representative Turner from the great state of Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, I've had the privilege of representing a city with Rice University and University of Houston, my alma mater, Texas Southern, historically black college university. And we've had these conversations many times. But I want to refer you the National Academy's report on equity in K through 12 STEM education highlights that persistent inequities in access to STEM opportunities driven by factors like race, income, and geography continue to limit participation and success in these fields. It is important that we work to expand educational access, secure federal funding for institutions that serve a very diverse student population, and further develop policies that broaden pathways into STEM careers. Dr. Parikh, did I get that right?
Parikh, I think.
Parikh and Dr. Copan, could each of you speak to the specific policies or investments that would be most effective in closing these inequities, where the gaps exist, and how do we make the most progress in the shortest period of time?
Thank you for the question. This is a critical question for the country. We're a country that is changing over time. If we are not pulling from all parts of the country, we are not going to compete with China or anybody else. And so, what are the things that can be the most beneficial? One is making sure that we are getting opportunity for everyone to participate in the sciences and being inspired by the sciences. So it shouldn't be that if you don't get in 7th grade into Algebra 1 that you're never going to be an engineer. That just shouldn't be true anywhere in this country, because it might turn out that you had a bad teacher in 6th grade. It might turn out that you had a bad year in 7th grade and you didn't get into algebra. But if we can make it to where there are multiple paths into engineering, then we can get there. That's just one example. But the reason why we have to do that is that there is now talent all over this country. It's like basketball. There was a time when all the basketball players went to Kentucky or Duke or UCLA. Now they can go to any college basketball team in the country. We have enormous talent in this country. We have wonderful institutions in this country. Let's make sure that we're feeding those pathways.
I fully agree with the comments that Sudip shared, and having first and foremost a welcoming environment for students regardless of where they're from, and ensuring that they know that they have a home and a pathway to build a career of success is essential. I had mentioned the fact that we are an elite university, and so we have worked very hard to ensure that everybody has a chance. So about 35% of our student population are women, and also about 35% represent minorities. And we're thrilled. We have the largest chapter of the Society of Women Engineers anywhere at Colorado School of Mines. So building community, but also creating outreach and inspiring the next generation about the possibilities. They're not going to be able to participate in the innovation economy and the excitement there unless they're encouraged, and encouraged at home as well as at school. And the important role that guidance counselors play throughout this whole journey, and connecting them with leading universities, connecting them with the kinds of resources so that their students can hear personal stories of people that look just like them.
And when we are pulling from these various backgrounds, would you agree with me that we are making our country more competitive, that and a failure to do so puts us at a disadvantage when competing globally? Would all of you agree with me on that?
We need the best of America to be part of this journey with us.
And let me just say, so it's important for us to be intentional. Just like our colleges and universities go after the best baseball players, or basketball players, of football players. No one yells about diversity and inclusion there. It is equally important that we go after our academicians, our students, in a very intentional way. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Representative Biggs from South Carolina.
Thank you, Chairman Babin.
Ma'am.
I appreciate you holding this important hearing today, and I want to thank the distinguished panel for your insight on these very important topics. So as a new member of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, I'm very honored to serve in this position and eager to take your ideas and get to work hard for the 3rd District of South Carolina. So my first question is, I want to direct it to Dr. Copan and Mr. Hammond, if you don't mind. Congressman Miller kind of touched briefly on this earlier, but I have a little bit of a different idea or thought on it, so I would like to hear your information on this. So public-private partnerships between national labs, academia, and industry are critical to maintaining U.S. leadership in science and technology and ultimately saving American lives and for the well-being of our citizens. So regarding artificial intelligence, what partnership models have worked well to maintain and to advance U.S. dominance in this sphere? And where can the United States learn from its failures in the AI domain?
Thank you so much. What a wonderful question, and I do believe that that we are on a journey and learning as we go. I think that public-private partnerships that that bring together all these players are certainly exemplified in the latest NIST Manufacturing USA Institute that focuses on digital twin, and so the application of artificial intelligence in partnership with the private sector. So there's 200 companies that are part of this new collaboration together with NIST. 7 of the Department of Energy federal laboratories are part of this relationship. And so having a flexible structure utilizing the authorities under what's called other transaction authority that allows people to negotiate terms and creates a framework then that can be leveraged in other public-private partnerships. And we've been talking about repeatable frameworks for success here. I think that the United States really needs to look at our current lead in key technologies for AI, in particular natural language processing, where the U.S. has a key lead, and looking at the ways that we can really double down, bring together those top minds nationally, and ensure that we're actually utilizing and then building upon the innovation infrastructure, including high-performance compute and GPU nodes. We're talking about the important presence of major companies like NVIDIA and IBM and others to be collaborators in these initiatives.
Great, thank you.
On compute in particular, I'd like to point you to a report just published 2 days ago from the Institute for Progress by Tim Fiss and Arnab Datta called Compute in America. It outlines a full strategy to create special compute zones on U.S. federal lands and all the dynamics that would go into that. Hardware and our data center ecosystem is our core advantage in AI. And with China, as I mentioned earlier, adding hundreds of gigawatts of energy to their grid, just in the United States, we're looking at, over the course of this decade, adding prospectively a Japan of energy in our data centers. And so we need to have a concerted effort to build and build smart. And also, if we make use of federal lands and special arrangements, it also is an opportunity to induce private developers to build capacity for DoD and DOE, including more secure facilities where private investment wouldn't normally flow.
Great, thank you so much. And just briefly, Dr. Wilson, thank you so much for your service to our country as an officer in the Air Force, a member of Congress, and as the Secretary of the Air Force under President Trump. As a healthcare professional and as a member currently of the Air National Guard, I understand very well how research and development often ends up in life-saving technology. not only in the military but in the private sector. So my question to you is, what is your experience with the disastrous DEI inclusion policies in the military as well as the collegiate research and development, and how has this shifted the technological balance between the United States and China?
Chairman, I'm probably not qualified to talk about the how it's affected things with China. UTEP never created a DEI office, and but we have results that people who advocate for DEI say they want. Most of the DEI offices and training were really fueled by the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020 and popularized by books like How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi and White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, which were after my time as secretary.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative McBride from Delaware.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a privilege to serve with you and with Ranking Member Lofgren. It's an honor to be here at my first Science, Space, and Technology Committee hearing, and I just got to say I am in awe of the four of you, your perseverance, and of course your willingness to share your expertise with us today. I'm also looking forward to serving with all of my colleagues on this committee and to work alongside each and every one of them in a bipartisan manner. As we've discussed today, the United States has long led the world in science and technological innovation, providing tangible benefits for my constituents in Delaware and for Americans across the country. Our work in this space creates jobs, it lowers costs, it improves health and quality of life, and certainly drives economic growth now and for generations to come. And as we've heard today, this national leadership bolsters our influence around the world and strengthens our competitiveness against countries like China, which, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, they are rapidly increasing their investment in R&D. If we want to keep enjoying these benefits, we've got to keep investing in that innovation. From the invention of nylon and Kevlar to credit cards, our little state of Delaware has punched above our weight. We've been on the forefront of breakthroughs in science and technology that have really transformed our lives for the better. And that pioneering work in Delaware, it's not just happening at major businesses, but increasingly within our small businesses. Just last week, I visited Sumery, a family-owned and operated small business on Main Street in the tiny, beautiful town of Magnolia, Delaware, that's providing cutting-edge digital forensic hardware and software to law enforcement across the globe to hunt down human traffickers and combat cybercrime. From the startups to our legacy employers, the U.S. has proudly become a leader in science and technology, leadership that requires sustainable, and I think as the witnesses have articulated already, predictable investments to maintain. Unfortunately, as some of my colleagues have noted, the current administration's illegal attempt to freeze federal funding puts that leadership at risk, while also putting Americans and Delawareans out of work. The University of Delaware, go Blue Hens, receives $190 million in federal research funding, including $40 million from the National Science Foundation. They and others in Delaware have already received multiple work stop orders as a byproduct of the funding freeze. I'm proud that the University of Delaware also houses the National Institution for Innovation in Manufacturing Biopharmaceuticals, also known as NIMBLE, which leverages federal investments to accelerate biotech innovation and advance competitiveness in that industry. Losing or even just seeing a disruption in this funding could have serious ramifications for Delaware and undermine our nation's leadership in this space globally. And so my first question to you, Dr. Copan, I saw you smile as I mentioned NIMBLE. As you know, NIST coordinates the Manufacturing USA network of institutes like NIMBLE at the University of Delaware. As this Congress takes a look at science funding, I'm curious if you believe that the Manufacturing USA program and its funding remains critical to U.S. competitiveness in advanced manufacturing, and if you do continue to believe that, why?
Well, thank you so much for the question. Welcome to the committee, and the role that Manufacturing USA Institute, certainly NIMBLE as a a unique type of partnership between the private sector, the engagement with NIST, and some of the unique capabilities around metrology and biology is a powerful combination. I spoke in my opening remarks about the importance of advanced manufacturing, and the ability for Americans to make is also a key part of American innovation. As we learn as we make, we optimize, we gain feedback from the customers. And it's such an important part of the Department of Defense mission. We've been talking about dual-use technologies and manufacturing and materials side. I believe it's essential for the United States to really focus on the manufacturing capacity that we have. We have lost the edge. And so here we have an opportunity to regain that, rebuild the workforce, and once again create supply chains that are trusted nationally.
Thank you very much. I have many more questions, but I'm out of time and I will yield back the rest.
Thank you. I'll call on Representative McCormick from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations on your elevation to chairmanship. It's awesome. He's going to be a great leader for what we're trying to achieve. In recent federal grant freezes implemented by President Trump, we have a valuable opportunity to kind of review what the money's being spent on. Now, we know that it's incredibly important to keep the United States on the leading edge of technology. As a matter of fact, at one time, we're leading space exploration, development of computers, other scientific advancements that nobody else in the world was doing. Russia was trying to keep on parity with us, but they're falling behind because they're trying to copy us. Now we spend probably 3/4 of our budget on welfare, and we really don't invest in science, space, and technology anymore other than the military, and so we are falling behind. So I think it's really important to have this grant process to keep us competitive into the future. However, the reason we've frozen it is because we found a tremendous amount of waste and diversion of those funds that could be helping your universities and your leadership to advance those things. Right now, we are relying on the private sector, such as Elon Musk, to put more spaceships into outer space than the entire governments of all the rest of the countries in the world. It's probably a dangerous predicament for us at this point, relying on private institutions to do that for us. So I want to address this from a realistic standpoint of how we move forward. First of all, we got to get rid of those kind of programs. And I suggest that anybody's in a leadership position who sees those funds diverted towards something that doesn't make sense to the general public, get rid of it. Because otherwise, everything goes. We throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's typical of the government. So I just want to encourage you as leaders to do that and review top down where you're spending your money so that it makes sense when your tuition goes up, that it's being spent on things that actually make sense rather than just to increase the tuition for some sort of political endeavors. I think it's also important to recognize that there's going to be a debate in science, whether it be on COVID technologies, on vaccinations, on science in general. It could be global warming. There's Democrats and Republicans calling into question what the science is. If you see Unsettled by Coonan, a Democrat who calls into question the way we're studying things. I think it's really healthy to have disagreements, especially in institutions where if you always go with the one size fits all, we never make advancements because we never question. In medicine, we've made tremendous advancements by the minority disagreeing with the majority and them being correct. I think, President Wilson, I have a direct question for you that kind of pertains to all this and how we advance. We noticed in Georgia, in the metro area, we have become an innovation powerhouse. I was a Georgia Tech alumni. I've watched what they've done in science and space and what they've done in innovation for rockets and everything else in the aerospace industry. What I love about the Georgia Tech Research Institute leading the way in the design of these different technologies, now top 100 winner in heat injury prevention system and developing robots capable of maintenance in outer space, which is incredibly exciting. I reflect on how you've advanced your university and what you've done in place of a DEI system. You kind of explained it in previous questions, but how do you explain the success you've had of elevating true diversity, but through meritocracy and also recognizing that everybody's capable? We have an incredible amount of diverse intelligence and innovation of all races and both genders, and watching people just explore their ability to create without actually forcing it down somebody's throat and saying you're going to be elevated regardless what your ability is. What's your secret to success?
Mr. Chairman and Congressman, thank you for the question. I mean, I think part of it is that we come at this from a very pragmatic approach, which is we do recognize that talent is widely distributed, opportunity is not. All right, we deal with a population that is disproportionately low income and that are first generation students. And that's not, that's probably all over the state of Georgia as well. So what do? You start out by analyzing and doing deep dives on your own data on how students succeed. What are the things that cause high-risk students to persist to graduation, and focus on those things. We have advisors, an advising model that is comprehensive. It's not just about registering kids for class. It's looking at their financial, social, academic circumstances, and then getting them engaged in the high-impact practices that are proven and data-based to help people succeed. There are universities in Georgia that have done the same, and I think that those kinds of things are much more successful. And in fact, there was a Rutgers study in November of 2024 that confirmed what a lot of people suspected, that some of the focus on DEI and anti-racism teaching and so on is not effective. It's actually counterproductive, and there's a much better way.
And I just want to second that as a former student body president at Morehouse School of Medicine, where I saw incredibly much more intelligent people and capable people than myself that didn't look like me. But we had those amazing relationships, and if you just let people flourish, that school took people who necessarily wouldn't have had an opportunity and flourished, scored above their grade in the next test as they continued to develop and had those opportunities. And it was all done on merit, and I love to watch it because everybody's capable if they're given a chance. God bless you for what you guys do.
Well, I think there's more than just being given a chance. One of the things that all of us in this room live educated, very successful lives. And our kids and grandkids have us. And that gives them an advantage. Our responsibility as leaders is to reach out to the kids who don't even know that the door of opportunity is there, and show them the door and engage them so that they want to come in with us. That's the difference.
Well said. And from the private sector, I appreciate all these solutions we give that are outside the government scope, because that's the real power of the United States. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like to call on the gentleman from California, Mr. Whitesides.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership. We're looking forward to working with you, and I think it's a great subject for our first hearing. I'm sorry that you guys have to go without lunch. You know, we get to go to other stuff. I'll be quick because I don't have much time. I just want to talk about the pipeline and stability. I was really touched by a couple of points in various points of your testimony. In terms of the pipeline, President Wilson was talking about the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. There's 16,000 applicants last year for only about 2,500 scholarships from NSF. You know, that speaks to the potential to grow the pipeline. I'd love for you to talk about that. But before I do that, I just want to call out, you know, in our district, the 27th, we have great educational pipeline. We have the College of the Canyons. We have Antelope Valley College. I believe that community colleges also have an important role to play as working in concert with, you know, the amazing institutions close to us, Caltech, UCLA, all these other amazing places, and the NASA facilities that we have, NASA Armstrong and JPL. I have to say I was shocked and disappointed about the freezes. As some of you may know, that happened at a key moment. The math scholarships were paused right at the moment when folks were deciding where they were going to do their postdocs. And so that's a point where we could lose our leadership, right? If people find that the instability, that we're not a stable place, then they could go take them in China or somewhere else. So any comments that you might have in their mind, maybe President Wilson could start on the importance of the pipeline and the importance of stability in promoting that pipeline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Congressman, you're right, that pipeline or pathway is an important thing. And with respect to the Graduate Research Fellowship Program at the National Science Foundation, there are two things I would say. First of all, one of the really good things about that program is it puts the scholarship money in the hands of the student, not the principal investigator. So the student can then go find what's right for them. And I think that's really powerful. And it may not be what most university presidents or principal investigators will tell you, right? But I think it's really good for us long term with respect to expanding the pathway and inspiring the next generation. The second thing is, many NSF grants don't require that the PI report who they're funding as graduate students. I think that's something to take a look at, and as far as expanding opportunities for American students. And there may be opportunities as well. The third thing I would say is to partner with the states. The National Science Foundation reviews 16,000 grant proposals from students who want to go on to graduate school. No matter what that number is, whether it's funded 2,500 from the NSF or 3,000, there are going to be some qualified applicants who are not funded, but they want to do it. Well, you don't have to review those proposals again. Partner with the states. My guess is that there's an opportunity for the states to fund their own version of a graduate research fellowship program and not even have to re-review the...
That's a great idea.
So I think that there's an opportunity, and that gets back to strategies to partner rather than just do everything itself.
Terrific, thank you.
If I can add to that, the private sector has a very important role to play here as well, in offering opportunities for internships, opportunities for co-ops for students, and really augmenting what's available from the federal side. The federal laboratory system, and we talked a little bit earlier on about the role that Idaho National Lab, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, my former agency of NIST, those fellowships, the chance to get the hands-on experience, and to look at inspiring not only those students who are going through it, but everybody that they're talking to, right? It's their families. It's the kids in the elementary schools who are hearing about these exciting opportunities in STEM by the people who are doing this hands-on.
If I can just speak in support of the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program, I was one of those. And what I can say about it is, I grew up in Western North Carolina. My parents worked in textile mills and furniture factories. They didn't make a lot of money. And when you look at how do you get into the sciences, how are you inspired to be in the sciences, what you realize is if there's a fellowship like that provides stability, then you don't need a safety net from your parents, because I didn't have a safety net. I'm helping. Right, and so that is the way to inspire and to get more of our American students into the sciences, by providing that stability. When we lose that stability, we lose them.
If I could add one thing, and that's the importance of outreach. I was the first in my family to go to college. I had a faculty member who said, if you weren't busy doing all this other stuff, you might be able to be a Rhodes Scholar. As far as I was concerned, that was sponsored by the Department of Transportation. I had no clue, right? Our students have no idea what a GRFP is. They have no idea what an opportunity of Fulbright might open. And there's, in addition, and attached to my testimony, you will see what outreach does. At a very small office to inform students and open their eyes to what the opportunity is. That's replicable at Hispanic serving institutions across this country.
That's my time. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Now, Mr. Weber from Texas.
Well, he saved the best for last. Okay. Mr. Hammond, I'm going to come to you. In your testimony, you state that innovation does not begin or end in the lab, but rather the most practical innovations result from the process of, quote, learning by doing. Could you elaborate further on that?
Certainly. Whether it's batteries, solar panels, any one of these technological categories, real innovation happens by scaling up production, figuring out, when you have actual people manufacturing the thing, how to discover new chemical compounds, new ways of process innovation that drive down costs and actually lead to genuine scientific breakthroughs. Many of the scientific breakthroughs that came from NASA's original space program were because we were just trying to get to the moon. And pursuant to that, you had to invent a lot of new technologies to get there. It's not because we had dozens of bespoke grants or requests for proposals, and we need to get back to something more like that in how we structure science funding.
So does the name Thomas Alva Edison ring a bell with you? Yes. So he worked in his lab. Y'all have all shaking. Y'all are almost as old as I am. I see that, yeah. So he worked in his lab. How many times did it take him to get the incandescent light bulb? Anybody?
I'm guessing hundreds.
Anybody know? Over 1,000. Okay, over 1,000. So he was absolutely putting the hands-on approach in that lab, and he stuck to it. He had that stick-to-itiveness. When Governor of Texas Rick Perry ran for the president in 2012, one of his calling cards was he used to say, "We want the states to be the laboratories of invention." I don't know if any of y'all remember that. Dr. Babin, you might remember that. He wanted the states to be the laboratories of invention. So we want that to be the case. We want, and I owned an air conditioning company 35 years. You're out there doing hard work, sweat, and blood, sweat, and tears, and you're putting everything in that you can. That's the kind of attitude we need. Coming back to you, Mr. Hammond, in your testimony, you state that, quote, "It is disturbing to see growing indications that federal science funding has lost its bang for the buck." Elaborate.
Yeah, to the point about states being the laboratory of invention, one of the side effects of federalizing science funding is we put all our eggs in one basket. And we do try to course correct for that with sort of ad hoc programs to try to diversify where funding is going, but it's still all in one basket. And so on the margin, I would be very much in support of decentralizing science funding back to the states in some cases. This is also pursuant to some of the other comments about, how do we get more young people into programs and so on. There's lots of evidence showing that younger researchers are, that's where creativity peaks. But because over time, the age of an average principal investigator has increased, and now they're basically gray in the hair until you get to run your own program.
So, but it's fair to say, isn't it, that that people need stick-to-itiveness. Mm-hmm. Thomas Edison had it, right? But they also need encouragement at home to be bringing them up. They need to know the opportunities that we're all talking about here today. Finally, in your testimony, you point out that many of today's most transformative science breakthroughs now occur at privately funded nonprofit research organizations. Why do you think that is, and can you put a quantitative number on that? Is it 10%? Is it 30%? What do you think?
It's unclear what in dollar terms, but in terms of impact, take a company like OpenAI. OpenAI started as a nonprofit, funded in part through Elon Musk, and is now basically the center of attention for all U.S. policy around AI. I also mentioned Arc Institute, which just discovered a new gene editing technique. The reason more and more research is shifting into these private research organizations, often partnering with universities, is to get away from the academic bureaucracy and the bureaucracy that tags along with federal research dollars. And so I think it's really a canary in the coal mine that something has gone wrong institutionally in our science agencies.
Good to know. In my time left, is it Dr. President Wilson? How do you feel about it? Is that something y'all noticed at UT, at your college?
Not so much the bureaucracy issue, but I do take your point with respect to learning by doing and the need to closely connect research and development with operations. Take the Corona project, which was the first satellite program, one of the early satellite programs, very rapid innovation, closely connected research and development with operations. Century series aircraft, the F-100, 101, 102, 103, 104, very rapid innovation, getting things built and out there and doing things. And I think when it comes to space exploration, connecting closely the people making the decisions with the operators and the innovators will be absolutely vital to getting back safely to the moon and beyond to Mars.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. And Representative Gillen from New York.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you to our witnesses for testifying today. As a new member of the committee, I'm very much looking forward to working together in a bipartisan manner to keep the U.S. a leader in technology and in innovation. So my first question, Secretary Wilson, as you know, the National Defense Strategy identifies China as the Department of Defense's pacing challenge and highlights the need to make the right technological investments that sharpen our competitive edge. And we've recently seen China's DeepSeek AI model surpass our own models like ChatGPT. What is the single most important thing that Congress needs to do to ensure that the United States remains dominant when it comes to key technology like artificial intelligence?
Probably one of my colleagues is better. Sam's probably better at that answer than I am. But I actually think that this week's kerfuffle with respect to DeepSeek is interesting, but I think there are American companies who are also pursuing similar strategies. And frankly, there are also low-cost, closed rather than open AI approaches like Gemini that are nearly as good. So we need to compete and win in the AI space. Most of that is happening in the private sector.
Mr. Hammond, would you like to add to that?
Yes, 3 points. Open source. So DeepSeek, because they lack the ability to actually monetize it, they don't have the GPUs and data centers. They've made it fully open source. It's now being used by millions of developers. #1 app on the App Store. We need to compete on open source so that worldwide researchers are using American models, not Chinese models. Second, energy. As I've talked about before, China is adding hundreds of gigawatts of energy to their grid. They've caught up on the technical side with AI, but their constraints are on hardware. We've export controlled our most advanced chips. This is point number 3. There are still gaps in those export controls, especially on the enforcement side. If those gaps remain open, China will catch up on hardware and then leap ahead because they have greater energy.
Thank you.
And if I could just add to that, I would be remiss as a former NIST director not to talk about the AI Safety Institute, the role of standards as well, private sector led, but brought together through federal funding and the important connectivity with higher education, to have also the range of workforce capabilities that the nation needs to win in AI.
Thank you. Dr. Parikh, do you want to weigh in on this as well?
The only thing I'd add is that we are in a place where we know our competitor sees this as one of the possibilities for a step change in their economic growth. And they see it, and they've put the energy into it and the passion into it and the dollars or yuan into it that they need to. We have to see it in a similarly competitive way. If we don't, there's no way to win.
Can I add just on the topic of the AI Safety Institute? I've been critical of DEI and so forth during this hearing, but I cannot lever those same critiques to the AI Safety Institute. It's been wholly focused on national security and preparedness, evaluating models. It will become more and more important as we want to push these models into the U.S. government for use in defense or just, maybe the DOE wants to use some AI in government. We need some internal in-house capacity to evaluate. And then when it comes to open source, there are studies from Anthropic and others showing that it's very easy to embed backdoors and what are sometimes called sleeper agents into these AI models, where you think the model behaves one way, but there's some magic word that alters its behavior immediately. And you can imagine if Chinese models become the dominant paradigm, they're in critical infrastructure worldwide, that would be a problem. And so one of the roles the AI Safety Institute can play is by auditing models for security, including the training data, to validate and give us a stamp of approval that American models are not just the best, but the most secure, and then use that as a way to promote our models as exports.
Is there a way that Congress can help with that?
And the biggest piece is just continued funding support. So to correct the record, earlier it was said that the repeal of the Biden executive order repealed the AI Safety Institute, which is not true. The AI Safety Institute is authorized under a national security memorandum. I believe it's going to remain. But NIST is there's pluses and minuses to having this in NIST. One of them, the budget is very tight, and there are proposals out there, for instance, for a NIST foundation that would allow private philanthropy to pitch in and actually allow reliable funding to go to the AI Safety Institute, which has genuine funding needs because they're trying to train and test these models.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I could just add, this committee has been very active with the EPIC bill, which supports the foundation model, and also the other return on investment legislation previously mentioned, which would much more broadly authorize not-for-profit foundations across the federal sector to enable much more flexible models and different forms of funding to be brought in to augment federal funds.
Thank you. I still have more time.
The gentlelady thinks she yields back.
Okay. I had many more questions, but I'll follow up some other time.
Friedman is recognized.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair Babin and Ranking Member Lofgren. I was very excited to be appointed to this committee. I was very excited to be able to talk about the hospitals in my district and the very large medical biotech facilities that we have, the amazing NASA JPL scientists who live in my district, about the work that's being done to foster clean energy and to push back against the climate change, which is wreaking havoc right now in California and around the world. I was interested in pushing forward policies that will help encourage research into fire resiliency and prevention in California, and to make sure that America, and particularly California, because I am biased, continue to lead the world on AI technology and other types of computer technology. But today I'm finding it really hard to do that, I have to say. I have been inundated by phone calls from my constituents and from those same world-class institutions and hospitals and research institutions directly because of the illegal actions that the Trump administration is taking right now that's putting so much of their work at risk, work that they have spent years putting in place, receiving grants for. All of that is jeopardized right now, and I'm finding it really hard to sit here and talk about directing funding towards research and development when it appears that Elon Musk can just illegally decide to not give that funding that was decided on and directed on a bipartisan basis through this committee and through Congress. You know, this includes life-saving cancer research, and I represent Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, and most of their advanced cancer patients receive their treatment through NIH grants that right now, as far as we can tell, are frozen. The critical climate science research that happens at NASA JPL is very much in jeopardy. This is money that we have used to hire and encourage the best and the brightest in America. And these are Republicans and Democrats who have directed this funding that has now been stopped. So I have a question for Dr. Parikh. I want to know, throw me a lifeline here. How can I sit here in good conscience and have these conversations when it appears that even when this committee comes up in a bipartisan way with directions for funding for science and research, that money is now not going to get there if Elon Musk decides he doesn't like the program? What suggestions do you have to help us actually get the funding that Congress already appropriated to the right sources?
Yeah. The answer for why is because we must. We are in a competition. We're in a race. And, you know, first of all, the folks in your district, particularly at JPL, I think almost 200 staff members at JPL lost their homes in the fires. That's a tragedy. We are in a race, and so if we are not funding the science going on at JPL, there are things at JPL that are absolutely unique in this country in terms of space exploration, in terms of our robots that look at the planets in this solar system. They can't be rebuilt without unless there's stability continuing them and keeping them going forward. What gives me hope is that I see the resilience of the scientists and engineers who are out in the community. And one of the things I've said over and over again is that uncertainty really worries our early career scientists. And whether it's the mechanisms that Dr. Hammond talks about or the status quo, whatever that is, those early career scientists, they're going to be the ones doing it for the next 20 or 30 years. And we have to keep them in this enterprise. And so when I think of what gives me hope is that they're resilient enough to continue moving forward because they want to solve problems. And we, policymakers, politicians, leaders of great institutions, have to make sure that the enterprise has the stability to get them there.
Well, thank you. And as we try to recover from these devastating fires, we need the EPA to be fully funded with all of their employees, not being encouraged to retire, not being laid off, but we need them on the ground so that people in Los Angeles know if their air is safe to breathe, if their water is safe to drink. They want to know what's on their soil, and that means we need government to work. And we also need the economic development, and we're going to need to have people have jobs to return to, and that includes the JPL scientists. It includes people who receive federal funding for biomedical research. It includes our hospital employees. It includes all of the science and medical institutions that rely on federal funding. So I would just ask my Republican colleagues particularly, do we have a reason to be meeting here? Why are we meeting if when we direct funding, that funding can be cut by one person or by the executive branch? I think this is a real crisis for this nation. It's certainly a crisis for Los Angeles. And I do hope that we can, in a bipartisan way, push back and assert the powers that the Constitution gives to Congress. With that, I yield. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to call on Representative McLean Delaney from Maryland.
Hello. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panelists for testifying. I have sat here for 3 hours and 44 minutes because I'm one of the most junior members. I am part of the freshmen in the 119th class. I might be one of the youngest members, but I'm probably one of the oldest in terms of experience and having been around for a long time. And I love the fact of investment, science, research, education, and how they drive innovation. It helps our workforce development, but it brings the best of America, of when you take research and you take all of these wonderful things and mix it in a public-private way that we lift up. And that is really what helps our national security, our economic security, and who we are as Americans. So I am thrilled to be here, and thank you for letting me. I represent Maryland's 6th district. That would be Montgomery County and Western Maryland. But you know, Maryland, Virginia, DC, this region is home to many universities, but also to NIST, that is in my district, close to NIH, and you know, the National Science Foundation as well. I am a big believer in what they've done, but just stepping back, I just want to say that you know, NIST in particular is one of the most incredible institutions. As you know, Mr. Copan, I'm going to ask you about this, but it's broad and deep. And you know, we are, under the First Amendment, really, Congress was explicitly giving standards, weights, and measurements in terms of that. And this does everything from quantum physics and AI to our standard protocols. And it is so important to who we are in terms of innovation. A lot of what I'm going to say, and I'm just going to say it briefly, is I was a telecom lawyer. I was a satellite executive. I worked in nonprofit in tech. But most recently, I was at NIST. I'm at NTIA as Deputy Assistant Secretary, and I dealt a lot with our standards and worked in terms of AI and how we look at our international standards. And I'm going to, you know, echo a lot of what our you know, I could say a lot of different things, but there's 2 questions I want to ask to all of you. One, research is the hardest thing to fund, and it's got the biggest ROI. And, you know, but a lot of research, basic research we've talked about, but a lot of the research that is done by our government agencies is so broad and deep, it will never be funded completely by our private sector. And, you know, so we invest in it and it's capitalized by our big partners. When I was at NTIA, I had the privilege of doing over 50 bilaterals around the world. Many at the ITU in terms of Open RAN and vis-a-vis Huawei with 5G, but also in terms of AI. And what I found was that you would have these private sector and then NTIA, NIST, State Department, engineers there, but the protocols of the world are being developed there. And the Chinese would have hundreds of people and we'd have a small team. And the companies would come in with a very wedge on a specific part that impacted their business. But the whole part of the country was not, you know, done but by our people. So my question is, in your view, in the current state of US competitiveness against China at the ITU and standard developments, but even more broadly, and I'm going to put this out to the whole, you know, how do we make sure that we have, that the private sector can stand forward? Because as we see these hiring freezes, I'm scared. And I want to make sure that we have the ability to fund these quietly, NIST and otherwise. What will be the alternative?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for your comments. As a former resident of Montgomery County, I also really appreciate the importance of the DC area, the tremendous number of federal laboratories and the partnerships between the public sector, the private sector. Standards are essential for the nation, and ensuring that the private sector understands their role in a private sector-led process, finding ways also, whether it's also through the tax credit program, through R&D tax credits, to ensure that there are incentives in place for the private sector to play the role. But things get better with federal agencies being there. And you talk about the role of NTIA and NIST and the others. We see a much more collaborative approach. We see a much more responsive approach. And whether there are hundreds of Chinese representatives at the standards table and only a small handful, we need to get the word out about the importance of this process. I'm pleased Colorado School of Mines, together with UL, will be hosting a standards institute that brings together higher education and looks to equip how higher education also deploys technology standards in their curricula. There's so much more that we can say, and thank you so much for being part of this effort.
And just generally, I know I'm almost out of time, but just how you think that, who will step up, and if we don't fund these types of government research, who will do it? And I'm just to the rest of the panel.
Government has a critical role. We've been talking about that this entire time. This committee has had a tremendous history of bipartisan collaboration. We're excited about the future. We know that there are some questions and bumps in the road that we're dealing with right now. This committee has a great heritage and the ability then to allocate funding to ensure that the right things happen for the science and technology enterprise and for national leadership globally is going to be important.
Okay. Can I just say something about NIST for just 30 seconds? Walt led NIST, and so he's got a small conflict. Let me just say to somebody who's never worked at NIST, it is one of the most important agencies in the federal government. When I travel around the world, the agency that people ask me about is NIST, and they want our NIST because they understand the value of standards, the power of having standards. So it's such an important agency.
All right.
And Mr. Chairman, can I would love to be able to submit to the record also about NOAA and the incredible things it does in weather research and other things that are not going to be by the private sector. So I will submit something for the record on that and turn it back.
Thank you. And now let's see the Representative Riley from New York. Sorry about that.
Thank you. No, it's all good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How are you guys doing? We've been here for like 4 hours. Everybody okay? I think there's only 2 of us. I was really nervous. I was going to be the one person standing between you and the lunch break you need, and then Max came. So thanks, Max, for not making me the bad guy. I'm so excited to be part of this committee for a number of reasons, Mr. Chairman. I was telling him before. One of them is when we got here and got to do committee assignments, I sat down with my top advisor, who's my 4.5-year-old, Patricio, and we went through all the committees and talked about what they all did. And I asked him, what committees should Dad ask to be on? And he was adamant that we do the robots and rocket ships committee. And here we are, so he's thrilled. I'm actually here because we have got to bring manufacturing back to this country, and this is a great place to do that. Dr. Copan, in my district in upstate New York, over the course of the last generation, we have lost tens of thousands of really good manufacturing jobs. We've seen plants close. Frankly, a lot of that is because a bunch of Washington politicians got us into terrible trade deals that made Wall Street rich by shipping our jobs overseas. And it's put us at a huge disadvantage. It has gutted the middle class. And so one of the things I'm most excited to work on this committee is bringing manufacturing jobs back home. We have got to start making stuff in America. We've got to start making stuff in upstate New York like we used to do, and not have all this stuff made in China and be dependent on China. So big question generally, from your perspective as a former NIST director, how do we do that? And in particular, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the various manufacturing programs at NIST, the return on investment from those. In Binghamton, we have the Alliance for Manufacturing and Technology, which is part of the manufacturing extension partnership, critically important. Was hoping you could talk to the record a little bit about the value of those programs.
Thank you so much, and I'm delighted that you're on this committee and your passion for rebuilding America's manufacturing base. I commented briefly earlier about the importance of making, and this committee has oversight for the Manufacturing USA programs, the expansion that we've seen recently with several new institutes, including the one that I was talking about, where AI, digital twin, and manufacturing for the semiconductor sector that critically involves the state of New York.
Absolutely.
And so excited about those opportunities. We know that so much innovation is driven by small and medium-sized enterprises. And so the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, I'm so excited in my current role as VP for Research and Tech Transfer at Colorado School of Mines, to be a close partner to the MEP program and supporting not only manufacturers in Colorado, but also across the American West. We recognize that programs like the cybersecurity cascade that came through the MEP program was enabled by the power of that network and by the linkage with NIST. It supports national security because small manufacturers are the key part of the manufacturing supply chain for the space program, for the aircraft that we rely upon for our U.S. military. So ensuring that there's awareness of the linkage between science and technology, the importance of the manufacturing sector and the need to bring those innovation streams together, and critically to rebuild the workforce. So much of what we need in our nation is to rebuild manufacturing jobs because they see them as part of their own future. They see that as important to their local communities. And I'm excited about what you're doing and what this committee is doing to rebuild American manufacturing base.
Thank you. Well, I'm really eager to work with you on that. And I want to follow up on what you said about the end about the workforce and the manufacturing workforce. And Dr. President Wilson, first, thanks for all your service to our country. I really appreciated what you said earlier about the importance of inspiring the next generation of scientists and engineers. If we don't do that, we can't compete with China. We've got to be able to do that. And in your testimony, one of the things you mentioned was enhancing Pell Grants for in-demand STEM careers. I'd love to hear more about that. And also on the subject of Pell Grants and STEM, I don't think a 2-year or a 4-year education should be the price of admission to the middle class in this country. I have a bunch of IBEW, the electrical worker locals in my district who are doing incredible work around CTE and apprenticeships. And I think we ought to start thinking about using Pell Grants to support CTE. My time's expired, just very briefly, and then maybe we could continue the conversation after.
I'm very happy to, sir. 24% of jobs in America today require some kind of STEM knowledge, but only half of those require a bachelor's degree. So you're absolutely right that it's possible to, it's very much possible to do that, and career and technical education is a part of it. I think it may be time for a new National Defense Education Act and NDEA 2.0, and that part of that may be to change some of the incentives with respect to Pell. And what degrees we're encouraging students to pursue so that we connect college more closely to opportunities and career.
I'd love to work with you on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, you're welcome. And last but not least, Mr. Frost from the great state of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lunch is upon you.
Did you bring it?
I didn't bring it. I'm sorry. Well, thank you so much for being here, everybody. It's so good to be here. And Madam Secretary, I am a former 10-year member of the Civil Air Patrol, so we love the Air Force. I represent a district that is the hub for modeling and simulation in Orlando, Florida right now. Very proud of what's going on in East Orlando and Research Park and a lot of the public-private partnerships and partnerships we're seeing with the military and the Army there, and the integration with our students at University of Central Florida, Go Knights. I think it's a really great example of the kind of ecosystem we need to build everywhere around this country to, of course, remain competitive with our adversaries, but also provide good avenues for all kids, all students to be able to do this important work for our national security and to make life better for all Americans. Mr. Hammond, I wanted to ask you about the factors making it harder for America to stay in the lead with science and technology. I share your concerns about this kind of apparent slowdown in American innovation. In your opinion, how can we best spend public dollars how could we best spend public dollars and be smarter on R&D as it relates to the private sector?
Thank you for that question. If I could give maybe 4 or 5 bullet points on what could be done for federal R&D in particular, I would say, prioritize and fund more high-risk proposals that have little or no preliminary data. Do less peer review and more accountable program officers, so actually have people who know the subject matter expertise triage what gets funded. We should greatly reduce reporting requirements in our federal grants, which now take up 40% of our PI's times. And then we should create new career tracks for younger scientists. But also piggybacking on Congressman Riley's point, I think ultimately the manufacturing agenda ties in with our science agenda, especially as you look ahead where near-term AI progress could significantly automate a lot of knowledge work. As a country, we've bet on, as our comparative advantage, we've bet on entertainment, finance, management, essentially all the sectors that are very close to having AI alternatives. And at the end of the day, our core competitive edge will come from real physical industries, and we need to make it a lot easier to build.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, when I look at things like DeepSeek, of course, under the well-known bureaucracy, the CCP, it seems like, they can still match American innovation with none of the hundreds of billions of dollars that folks like OpenAI, Oracle, Microsoft want taxpayers to dig deep for. Something to keep in mind. You highlighted in your testimony how federal spending on science, research, and development in absolute and in inflation-adjusted terms is at its highest levels, but it's actually at a low point as far as percentage of our GDP is concerned. On this committee, I think we need to look at redoubling our commitment to scientific research, not just in the raw dollar amounts, but also to match what we need to remain competitive and what's needed to lead. Mr. Hammond, thinking right now in the final few minutes about factors challenging our ability to lead in innovation, you point to a research system that punishes heterodoxy. Can you say a little bit more about that and explain what you mean?
Yes, absolutely. We've heard a lot today about concern over grant freezes at NSF and so forth. Much of this literature on this slowdown in science emerged out of the pandemic, where we had a national emergency, a global emergency, where NIH grants were critical to supporting new treatments, and in many cases took 9-12 months to actually come through. In some cases were rejected because they used the wrong font, and that gap had to be filled by private philanthropy. And really coming out of the pandemic, we should have looked back on our science programs and said, why did they fail? And try to draw a distinction between science and science programs, the same way that we distinguish between a housing program and someone actually having a house to live in, or education program and actual education outcomes. Until you make that distinction, we're going to really be chasing red herrings.
Thank you. Dr. Parikh, Mr. Hammond has said that young academics basically can be punished for thinking outside the box. How can we better encourage diversity of thought in science and tech research?
Diversity of thought is critical to science, and we have to know that most of the things that we say today are probably wrong. That's just the way science has always worked. That said, I think it is actually, I don't want to overstate the case, because I will tell you that I'm the executive publisher of Science Magazine, and the surest way to get into science is to say something that was wrong that was really important to all of us. It has to be backed up by incredible data, but that is the surest way to get into science. I don't want to overstate that problem. The other thing that we can do is make sure that culture of seeking truth is there. And there's nothing I think that should be a disagreement for anybody in this room, that we should be seeking truth. That is what the sciences are about, and that we have a process that even when we have our own political leanings, because everybody does, but we have a process that puts forth data. You look at it, you argue about it, and we argue about things publicly like COVID, but then we argue about things privately like superconductivity. The people aren't even watching those arguments, but boy, they are pretty rough. They're happening behind the scenes. We want to continue to make sure that happens in the scientific culture, and I think it is. I don't want to overstate that's in some way happening.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I would also like to request unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the Quantum Industry Coalition. And so let it be so ordered. Thank you. Now we have one last. I said last but not least a while ago, but we've got Mr. Nick Begich from Alaska for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to those who are testifying today for your patience, as it seems like you're going to end, and then we just keep going. But I'm glad to say that I am the last among a long line of distinguished colleagues, and I really appreciate the comments just made by Mr. Frost and those here about diversity of thought. So important to the scientific method and process that we challenge orthodoxy, that we come back to the table with new ideas, because that's how we advance the ball forward for everybody. First question I have, and I'll have two quick questions that kind of deal with futurism, so maybe a nice place to end the hearing today. So first for Mr. Hammond, on the subject of IP protection, is it realistic to believe that in an AI mature and fully integrated environment that IP protection controls will be sufficient or even possible?
Yes, that is a great question. I think we have to assume that they won't be. Even if they may be, we have to assume that they won't be. There's different ways to have a moat. One of them is to have a legal thing called a patent. Another way is to have to innovate much faster than anyone can copy you. A third way is to have a robust ecosystem of workforce and actual talent. You know, I'm sure China has every single Boeing blueprint for their airplanes, and yet they're still struggling to build a wide-body airplane. And that's because that's not contained in the patent. That's contained in the actual workforce and the expertise.
That's a great answer. I appreciate that. Second question for Dr. Parikh. We have convergent J-curves in large language models, in agentic AI, in advanced robotics. How do we expect this disruptive convergence to change STEM education? Is there a way to get ahead of this? How do we do it? And after you're complete, if others want to weigh in on that as well.
To me, it actually highlights something that we should be teaching more of in the sciences anyway, which is that the question matters more than the answer. How you ask the question, how you specify it, that actually matters much, much more when you have a polymath in your pocket. And so, because you don't need to figure out the way to do it, that'll get figured out. And so that's the most important thing in terms of if you're going to have all these technologies, let's make sure that we understand what the right problems are.
If I can just add to that, I think it's so important as we look at the future of education. It's the intersections that also matter. Having grounded scientific, technological, engineering disciplines is fabulous, but the future is at these interfaces and the enabling power of the tools, helping our civilization, our American citizens to embrace these new tools for the future rather than fearing them, and to see those as essential parts of American competitiveness.
What they said.
That's great. Well, I'll tell you what, great answers. Appreciate your input, and I yield the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank our illustrious witnesses for your valuable testimony today, each and every one of you. We've gotten a lot out of this. Has been a very long hearing today, but we've learned quite a bit. And I just want to thank you for each of your careers, what you brought today, and just wish you the very best, safe travels. The record, also want to thank our members. I think I'm the only one left in here except for Mr. Begich. The record will remain open for 10 days for additional comments and written questions from the members. And so with that, this hearing is adjourned.